Licensing Committee to order. We've got several items on the agenda to discuss. The first item is a request from Mr. Lipscomb Davis for an extension of credit for his audit portion of the CPA exam for 9 months due to an illness. Some of the facts here: last summer, specifically the first 2 weeks in August, I assume would be of 2013, or, well, 14, I guess it'd be last August. I don't have really clarification, but it says he was hospitalized with a severe case of meningitis. So yeah, it would be 13. And these various calamities lasted into early 2014. He started taking the CPA exam in 2011 and passed the BEC section, but lost that credit. Decided to finish the exam again, passed the audit section, it doesn't say when, and was scheduled to take the reg section on August the 5th, and he missed the test due to my illness. Was taken to the ER on August the 3rd, 2 days before he was supposed to sit for the test. He's asking that we extend the audit section credit for 9 months due to that illness. Any comments?
I'd move that the extension be granted.
We have a motion to grant the extension. Do I have a second?
Second. Can I?
Discussion, go ahead.
Mark, did we get any further information on this other than this email that you received?
If you'll flip on over, Henry, I'm sorry, be sure you speak into the microphones. I'm guilty of that as well. If you'll flip on over, there's a note from his doctor from Heritage Medical on your iPad supporting his statement.
What have we done in the past? Have we generally, in cases like this in the past, have we approved those?
Usually when there's a good case for an exception like this, the man clearly has an illness that prevented him from being able to sit for the exam in a timely manner. Yes, you have extended the credits.
More discussion? A motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Next item we have is an extension of, which section? Shirley Ford, she's asking for an extension of her, I lost a second. I'm sorry, she's asking, yeah, for the score expiration date. She passed the CPA exam in 1989, and from reading this, apparently she'd never applied for licensure, and when she applied in, let's see, the ethics portion in August of 14, I believe in that time the scoring requirements the score expiration regulation. What's the details on that? On the new rule, on the rule change?
On the score expiration?
Between 89 and 2014.
That went into effect in March of 2014, I believe, in regard to the CPA exam scores expiring after 10 years.
Prior to that, there was no limit, is that correct?
Prior to that, they were kept in perpetuity, yes.
I'm sorry, Mark, when was you just said it and I just missed it. When was the effective date of the rule change?
March in 2014.
March, okay.
She's asking that we grant her a waiver to allow her to apply under the rules in which during which she passed the exam. I think we've granted this type of request before.
You've not had this type of request before? No.
Because the rules are new, is that
Exactly.
the primary reason?
Yes, sir.
Didn't this come up at our last meeting?
No, not this one, Henry.
Oh.
Mark, is it fair to say we have no precedent for this particular request?
I believe that's correct.
Mark, I'm new to this committee, so what about prior to this rule going into effect? Do we have any idea of how many people would have a score from over 10 years ago that would apply for a license? I mean, do we have any data like that?
I don't have the hard data with me, Gabe, but yes, we've had people that have had scores that were over 10 years apply. After the flood, we had several people that wanted to apply, and their scores were over 10 years old, and we had to rebuild files, which is what happened in Ms. Ford's case.
I mean, I would take the position that those that passed the exam prior to this rule change would they not be grandfathered into the old rule, and then those going forward would be subject to the new rule, the 10-year requirement?
That's not the way the rule reads, Stephen. There's no grandfathering in effect. And the difficulty there is that still requires us to keep all those scores prior to that time. And in many cases, we simply don't have them. They were in the basement and they're gone in the flood.
Maybe this is for Mr. Whitaker. Do we have a legal authority to be able to go outside of what the rule says to grant this extension?
Most of the time, I would probably say no, but I think it really depends on the answer to Mr. Eldridge's question, because if the board takes the position that the folks from the before time of March the 11th of this year, if they pass the exam before then they qualify under the old rules, then you probably can go forward. If it takes the position that the determinative date is when the 10-year plus expired applicant applies or comes to the board and asks for a license, then the answer is probably no. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess I don't disagree with Mr. Eldridge. I think that may make sense, but I guess the countervailing point on that is that if that's the case, then our rule effectively wouldn't go into place for 10 years because we've got people for the previous 10 years that have passed the exam that hadn't applied for an application for a license, and they won't be. I mean, it just seems odd that if that's what we're going to do, potentially the extreme is that we passed a rule now that's in effect, but that actually won't have effect for 10 years. Is that a fair, or am I misunderstanding?
I think that's probably fair.
Let me ask the question a different way. Does this board have the authority to grant an extension to this lady?
Say extension, do you mean a waiver? She's asking for a waiver?
Or waiver?
Yeah.
Mark, is it in this book or not yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
The 10 years.
Mind just giving us a second to look through our iPad and see what we can find?
We'll skip to the next item and let them look that up. Is that good? All right, the next request we have is from Julie James. She's asking for a 1-month extension of BEC. I think she missed the, she's requesting a 1-month extension. If the section expired 1 day later, she could have set for or scheduled the fair exam on October the 1st, but she missed it by a day. She made a 74 the first time on it. Again, she's asking for a 1-month extension so she can take the FAR section again and pass the exam. Part of the delay was she's had some health problems, which we've got all the medical records here as well.
States in here she's requesting extension through the month of October. And so if we were to grant this, would it be 1 month from the time that it's granted?
It would be a 1 month, I guess, through the end of November.
Like she's requesting an extension through the month of October.
And looking, it looks like she made the request in the middle of September. So I guess my question would be, if we're going to do it, we got to make sure she has a chance to actually schedule a test and get the scores back, or else it doesn't do any good, right?
Do we have the option to grant an extension longer than what's requested because of the timing?
And I guess I don't want to interrupt Mark, and I know they were looking at that, but my question, I guess, would be, do you know if she actually scheduled the exam for October the 1st, or was she waiting to hear back from us before she did that?
I think she's waiting to hear back from us.
Okay. Do we know? I don't know what the testing schedule is. Do we know when then?
How long does it take if I schedule today, how soon could I take it?
Depends on when a seat's available, Stephen. I mean, they've got to generate your notice to schedule, so it's going to be at least 5 business days for that to generate and get mailed to you.
I think the request is reasonable. I agree with the point that we need to make sure we grant enough time, since we're just now meeting today, and she made the request back in September, whatever it was, in September.
Seems like as long as we confirm that we have the authority to do it, it seems like we could treat the request as if it was made today, and then her request was continuing it through the end of the following month. So we could say the end of the following month, which would be November. It seems reasonable, as long as Mark and Mr. Whitaker agree that we have that authority, if that's what the committee wanted to do.
Grant the extension for 1 month from today?
I would say through the end of November, just to be
No,
safe.
that's fine with me.
That gives the rest of this window to get it scheduled, so I think that would be fine.
1 month ends tomorrow based on her request, so. Do I have a motion to extend through?
Moved.
Okay.
Second?
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Y'all still researching? Going to the next 2 items, let's discuss them together first. You got 2 requests for firm name approvals. One is it's a new request from Jonathan Fault. I think his firm is Fault CPA, and he's asking for a name change to Integrated CFO. And the second one is we got, I guess, an email from Devon Crutchfield, who was asking for the name of Inter-Account for his CPA firm that we discussed at our last meeting. I think both of these items obviously are going to fall under the issue of whether or not we grant fictitious names for firms that apply. we can discuss it here, but, I mean, my opinion would be, is this probably going to be a bigger issue than just these two items? It may be something that the board would like to discuss as a whole, rather than us hash out these two items individually, since they're both related. And it's obviously a topic we've been discussing at, well, it'll be multiple meetings tomorrow. Our recommendation will be we table these and push them to the board for full discussion tomorrow.
Mark, are you going to have more discussion on this issue tomorrow for us?
What you have here is what's going to be considered, Henry. There's not going to be any further discussion, I think. Who are you, gentlemen? And there's nobody here to discuss this with you. I mean, nobody has appeared, so it could be a full board discussion, but this is all the information you're going to have.
Okay. I didn't know if you all had done any research into this whole issue of fictitious names or not.
Mark and I have done some looking, and we've had some discussions. If the committee's will is to table this to the full board, we may just reserve it until then. And also, I believe Mr. Crutchfield may be back before us tomorrow, just in case the full board wishes to ask him any additional questions. So I will leave it to the committee if they'd like to hear from me about this now or wait till tomorrow. I can do it either way.
Let's just wait till tomorrow.
Need a motion for that?
So move.
Motion to refer both matters to the full board for
Right.
their consideration
Exactly.
tomorrow.
More discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Got an answer for us? Or opinion?
A legal counsel look at it, Mr. Eldridge.
I can play the Jeopardy music if you need me to.
I suggest we continue to move through the agenda.
Yes, sir. All right. The next item we have is a request from the CFMA, which is the Construction Financial Management Association of Middle Tennessee. They're having a request for an exempt CPE sponsor status. They provided us a kind of a summary of their organization and a detail or a listing of the past few meetings they've had since February of 2013 and the topics that they have covered at those meetings. I will open up for discussion. Appears that the three chapter officers are all three CPAs. Mark, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do we have other chapters of this organization that have exempt status?
No, you had, I believe it was the East Tennessee chapter of this organization requested exempt status a couple of board meetings ago, and you denied it.
Okay.
But this chapter has built a different argument, if you will. They actually have members here to speak to you if you have questions for them.
I'd be glad to invite them to speak if they'd like to.
Members of the board and this committee, we appreciate you giving us this opportunity to come and answer any questions you have. My name is Alex Lee. I'm a CPA here in Nashville. Joining me are Matthew Hale, CPA with Cooper Travis, and John Moran, CPA, who is at W.R. Newman and Associates. We are aware of the Knoxville chapter, East Tennessee, their request, and actually watched the video from last year's meeting about that. And just we felt that it would be beneficial to our organization and the profession in general to help our members who are also practicing CPAs that are in this, our specialized industry, to be able to get CPE credit for the work we're already doing. I think it'd be a good opportunity. And like I said, we try to get a head count of our membership. We think it's somewhere between, 30 and 40?
Yeah, about 40 of them.
About 40 of our membership of 100 members are active CPA licensed. Most of them are in the private industry. Some of them are are with firms in public practice.
Got a question. How long are these presentations at each of these meetings?
They run right at an hour, so we would meet that 50-minute per hour requirement.
Questions?
Got a technical question for Mr. Crocker. Mark,
Yes.
if we were to do this, would we require that this organization provide the material to us in advance to approve
No.
prior? Okay. Has anybody seen any of the actual content of these presentations that are summarized here on your staff?
Not to my knowledge, no. I haven't. Karen, you haven't looked at any of this, have you? No.
I'm making a general statement, I guess, and there's nothing against you guys at all, but, as a member of the board, I feel a responsibility to preserve the integrity of our CPE program. And, just looking at these topics, they seem like legitimate topics, but I guess just a general comment is, what happens if we grant organizations exempt status and then all of a sudden the topics become watered down the second year, and then it becomes, I've seen some, not y'all's, but I've just seen some of these where they've got they'll have a presentation it's more of a sales pitch than anything else, and it's nothing really educational about it. Is there some sort of way that these could be reviewed? Obviously, we look at it reviewing on an annual basis. How many exempt status have we granted? Do we have about that? Just approximate?
Karen, do you have any idea right off the top of your head?
Around 45 to 50.
5 to 50?
40, I would say.
45 to 50?
I guess what I'm trying to say is it something that just in general, that we need to review these more on a regular basis to make sure that they're staying in compliance with our CPE requirements rather than just getting watered down and becoming, sales pitches or, what I'm talking about, where they bring in a vendor comes in and talks about their product and there's no accounting material or, information on there. Just throwing that out for discussion.
And do we have any other associations that we've considered exempt, other than NASBA?
There are, I believe the Restaurant Managers Association is among, there are quite a few.
Is this something like the Tennessee Society of CPAs falls under, and some of the other, what am I thinking of, state planning councils and those
Yes,
things?
I think they fall under the rule for state societies and other professional organizations.
Okay, so that's a different than the exempt group that he's asking for?
I believe, Mark, that state societies are exempt automatically.
Yes.
Others are exempt if the board decides that they are.
Okay.
Didn't we
If
exempt
they are,
them?
excuse me, Vic, if they're professional accounting associations, Henry, that's what you're looking for. If they're professional associations, sorry, Vic.
There was some kind of insurance, either group or association last year that we got some information on. Do you guys recall that?
There were three
Or was it just three specific
classification
courses?
levels. Well, there were three classification levels, and I think we reviewed the course material for each of those three, and I think we granted status for, I don't think,
I'm sorry, those were exams for the Life Office Management
Yeah.
Institute.
I don't
Yeah,
think we
that's what it
granted
was.
exempt status for them. I think we just granted it for
It's
that.
just those
for
particular-
two of the three, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't grant all three.
Whitaker, is it 05-.05, is that the rule that deals with is that the only rule that deals with exemptions? Number 3 says the following are exempt from registering with either NASBA or the Tennessee roster CPE sponsors, and it has 4 subdivisions. Is that the only rule we have related to exemption?
Yes.
Looking at the list of the meetings that you had, the one that was in November, the Historic Transformation of Middle Tennessee, and it says Field of Study Other, is that saying y'all would not have granted CPE credit for that?
Correct. That was actually our scholarship dinner. We had college students that we had given scholarships to. And we try to do one program a year that is not necessarily an accounting and financial. It's just more of a general, because we had spouses there, and I mean, my spouse, that's what she asks whenever she wants to go to sleep, to explain Section 179 depreciation to her again, and puts her right out every time. But from time to time, and we would not even try to say, oh, well, that's CPE. We know that that's not appropriate. And with regards to the, how do you make sure it doesn't become watered down, we had the concept of we could form a committee that specifically says there must be at least one CPA on this committee, and they're in charge of putting together the meeting agendas and the programs and the speakers, as a way to kind of bridge that gap, and maybe that would be some type of way of providing some assurance to the board that we're genuine in our request.
Given that you're a group of financial managers, is it in your best interest to try to have substantive topics for your meetings?
Yes, sir.
Not your members won't come.
Mhm.
I mean,
That-
they're there to learn, so if you're not there, if you're not giving good topics, then what's the benefit?
More discussion or questions?
Chairman, I think I'd make a motion that we approve.
Second.
Motion to approve and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's granted. We'll recommend to the board that they
Thank you.
accept this. One quick question on this again, back on what y'all can go ahead. I was just a question for Mark. Another question.
Stay up there.
Tell me about 179. As far as quality control, I guess, going forward, I mean, do we have any kind of review process that are involved in this, or do we just grant it and assume that everybody goes on down the road and complies?
Even up to this point, we have just granted it and assumed that everyone's going on down the road and doing what they're supposed to do. I think with the staffing that we have now, it's possible that we can probably go back and do some type of cursory review to make sure that they are doing that they're providing quality education, at least by topic. I'm not sure that we can review the courses, but we can at least see what they're offering.
I mean, can we
And
not
that's
do
something we have not done in the past.
some sort of selective sample every year? Where obviously, I don't want to. There's no need to look at all 50 of them, but just pick a more like the CPE audit process. Just pick a sample and just have them submit, a summary of each of the presentations, and they're reviewed on an
Sure.
annual basis. Is that something we need to add a rule to, or is that, how do we handle that? Assuming that's something the committee is interested in discussing with the board.
I think it's a good idea.
I do too, I agree. I think it'd be nice to be able to get some feedback from your staff, Mr. Crocker, about a suggestion maybe of how y'all would do that, set out some criteria. I mean, I understand the notion of it is to be exempt and not meet the criteria of NASBA or, whatever, but it would be kind of interesting to hear what you all thought you could handle and you could do.
Let us put something together for you, Stephen, and we will bring it to the next board meeting.
If not, I'm going to ask to be exempt from CPE and just trust me that I get my CPE, right?
All right, Mr. Eldridge. Let's
Gotta get it by us.
You're not going to be a sponsor.
Come on. You want to just present something to the next board at our next meeting about that, just a recommendation? Again, I don't want to overwhelm our staff, but I think some sort of sampling process, audit process, maybe.
Sure. Let us look at that, Stephen. We'll come back with a plan.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Eldridge, I do have an answer for you on the item that we were looking at earlier. It was throwing me off because the 2014 update has not made its way to the iPad or our little rule book yet. So we will fix that, at least on the iPads post-haste. But I'm on Rule 0020-01-.06. On the iPad, you will only see 10 paragraphs, but that rulemaking that went into effect on March 11th of 2014, added a new paragraph 11 that does say all scores shall expire 10 years after the first passing score is earned. However, upon written request by the applicant, the board may, in its sole discretion, grant an extension of the score expiration date for good cause shown. So basically, it's up to you guys. If you decide, and there's no definition for good cause, there's no guidance, no nothing. I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts, but
No, we left that door open intentionally when we
That's
passed
correct.
the rule, is what we did.
And I thought we had discussed those that got shut out of the door by, us drawing a line in the sand.
That
Somebody
was the
passed it.
concern.
That's right.
I mean,
I'll entertain a motion to accept this extension request, or this,
Before we do that, can I just ask the question?
Sure.
Just because, since Mr. Whitaker gave me the bad news, there's not a definition. I mean, do we agree that this would be a good cause? That would be the question.
I would think so.
No, I mean, we'll either agree or disagree based on a motion. It'll get a motion, it'll get a second, it'll get a voted up or down, right?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we thought about the whole language of the rule, that it talks about a good cause exception. So that's.
Yeah, I mean, I
was
think,
asking the question.
if I remember correctly, I hadn't watched the tape or anything, but I think the discussion was exactly what we were talking about. We were concerned, let's say someone passes it the day before, and all of a sudden the door's closed, and, they're shut out. Just,
Say for the record, it's pretty impressive to pass the CPA exam. So I say that as a lawyer. So, it seems unfair to make somebody have to do it twice.
So I move that we grant the exemption.
Second?
more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The next item we have is a CPA firm application request from Miss Judy Valou. Is that right? Got her application. She's submitted all of her application, and looks like all the additional information required. Have y'all? I assume y'all have reviewed this file. Is there anything unusual about it?
The unusual thing is that the experience that she has mentioned at the firm where she notes self-employed from April 2010 to 2014, I believe she's referring to a Florida CPA firm. That permit lapsed in 2005. Her Florida CPA license lapsed in 2010. So my feeling was that she was referring to experience gained at an unlicensed firm in Florida.
Her firm, correct? So she operated for 4 years without a proper license?
Renewing the license in 2005.
I have some experience prior to that
Not that she's
otherwise-
noted on this application.
Experience with an unlicensed firm wouldn't qualify as experience under our rules, would it?
Is that true? Is that,
I believe that's correct. It's, I don't think it qualifies.
did you give any indication or reasoning why she decided to operate a firm without proper licensing?
No, and I believe she may have applied for the firm permit as a result of a possible complaint against her license because she was listed on the IN list as a CPA, and our complaint coordinator discovered that she didn't have a firm permit to do those taxes, and she was asked to get a firm, and that's the reason that she submitted this application.
So we're the ones that prompted this request.
Unless she can provide evidence that she meets some other qualified experience requirement, my inclination is not to approve.
I would agree. I'd also like some explanation as far as why she chose to ignore the rules and operate for 4 years without proper licensing.
She has a Tennessee CPA license, but I believe she was unaware that she had to have a firm permit as a sole proprietor.
I'd like to hear that from her to see what the reasoning was. So, do we have a recommendation?
This issue is over a firm permit and not her license?
Yes, sir.
For a firm permit, does she have to, so let me make sure I understand, I'm sorry. Did she have a valid
A little
CPA
confused about this,
license
too.
during 2010 to 2014? Did she have a valid CPA license, just
Yes,
not a
sir.
firm
Yes, sir,
permit?
but not a firm permit.
And so now she's trying to get her firm permit.
Yes, sir.
What is she required to have in order to get a firm permit?
Because she is doing compilations, she has to show that she has the necessary experience, and the experience that she referenced, she lists the firm Judy W. Villu CPA, which is not a licensed firm that's subject to peer review.
That's what brought all this to light.
I don't think, based on the information we have, we can grant this request. I mean, I think if we deny the request, we could send notification that she provide adequate experience that was obtained through a properly licensed firm.
I'm thinking out loud, which is always scary, but in order for her to get her CPA license, she had to have qualifying experience, right?
That's correct.
So it's just an issue of she's put down, I mean, she's a valid CPA, but she put down her work experience as being a firm that doesn't have a registration, which she's now trying to correct. And we're telling her that she can't correct because she put down a firm that doesn't have a registration.
Well, I assume at one time she had the adequate experience if she could just present that
Yeah,
to us,
that's-
because she had to get it to get the assuming to get the CPA.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. By default, I mean, almost, if she's a valid CPA, she has to have what would otherwise be valid experience, right? I mean, if somebody left a firm, opened up their own firm, wanted to get, it's
But
just
had
a
the
matter of what experience she puts down.
Right, and I don't think we can assume that, just, she probably has it, but I think that we have to have the information
You
presented
just
to
need to
us.
ask her to put down a valid firm as her experience.
Right.
Is that right?
And I also need to look at her CPA licensing file for us to see what she listed as that experience. I mean, that's the other piece of information that's not on the iPad that, as I see it, I mean, that's just my thought, but if there is valid, legitimate experience that would qualify somewhere, and as you said, Mr. Eldridge, presumably there is for her to have a Tennessee CPA license, then maybe she just put down the, or it needs to be corrected or something, but I think we have to look at that also.
Is she a Tennessee CPA as a result of passing the exam in Tennessee?
I don't know if she has a reciprocal license or if this was her initial license.
So that goes back to Chris's comment that it probably need to take a look at that too. Okay.
What's the protocol? Do we deny the request, or do we table the request and then request more information?
Well, if it's something that could be, at least the Tennessee licensing stuff could probably be come up with before tomorrow, then the committee could table it to the full board tomorrow to see if we can come up with that this evening. If not, then we could just say denied, but offer her the opportunity to send us in documentation or whatever she has to prove up sufficient experience to be able to qualify.
I still have interest in finding out why she decided to operate the firm for 4 years without a firm permit. Again, if it's the reasoning is she didn't know, that's, one thing, but if, I just don't know. I'd like to know that information.
Seems to me at this point, our thing to do is to deny the request and then have her to submit information about who she's worked with in the past.
Also review the CPE, her CPA license file as well, assuming she got.
I'd like to make a motion that we deny the request.
Second.
I have another question, so I don't want a second yet. No.
Go ahead.
So if we deny the request, is she going to be in a position where she's going to end up coming before probable cause committee and we're going to assess her fines, et cetera?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to that is it depends. I mean, she may, depending on what we find, already be in violation such that we're forced to open a complaint. We don't know yet. But again, part of that will depend on her response and what her Tennessee CPA license file says. I mean, I can say that there is not a complaint open against this person or firm at this time, but it doesn't mean there wouldn't be one open potentially.
I guess I'm just trying to make sure that by her trying to file an application to do the right thing and us denying it, that we're not then going to cause her harm from this particular action. I'm not talking about stuff in the past.
And I guess he said you could pull her file today and present the information tomorrow to see if if she has adequate experience when she was licensed for her CPA exam with Tennessee, then that would provide evidence that she had adequate experience for a firm permit. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's probably right, and then she would have to submit a revised firm permit application. Now, that doesn't mean she might not have some problems in Florida for operating for however many years without proper licensure, but that's a matter for the Florida board, not this board.
I would recommend that we at least give her the courtesy of just go online, as you said, review the file that we have, the information we have with her CPA license, and at least review it tomorrow, and then we could make the decision to deny it or how to proceed tomorrow with the additional information.
If I can point out something here, you have a motion on the floor,
Well, I assume the motion
I'll
died for
withdraw
lack
my
of
motion.
second.
but you seconded it.
No.
Okay.
I withdraw my motion.
Withdraw the motion.
So are we tabling it till tomorrow or tabling it to the next meeting or what's?
Till tomorrow. is
Table
my
it till
understanding.
tomorly for the
Okay.
board to discuss,
Yeah, we
assuming we
believe
have.
we can obtain whatever
additional
information is in our office,
Right.
hopefully by tomorrow, and then make a decision at that time to what to do with it.
So I make that motion to table this until tomorrow.
Second.
Motion, we have a second. You can get the information for us tomorrow for the board meeting, or whoever can get it. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Next item we have is a CPA application from Monica Henson. Can you give us kind of a summary on this topic? It says experience was gained at H&R Block. The experience verification form was done by her supervisor, I assume, at H&R Block.
There again, you actually have another issue to deal with marginally, is the fact that
Not a CPA firm.
not a CPA firm. The CPA's
What does the rules say? That you have a CPA who works for a non-licensed firm who is certifying her experience verification, which I assume the violation is the fact that it's not a licensed CPA firm.
correct.
Does the law actually say it has to be a CPA, a person that works in a CPA firm?
No, in order to verify experience, the law says they've got to be must be a CPA in good standing.
Right.
So technically,
Is this person in good standing?
This lady's in good standing, so she
Okay.
has the ability to sign off on this.
Okay.
But the issue is, she is practicing out of an unlicensed firm. Both of them are.
Well, the question, back up.
What I hear from that is it doesn't specify that you have to be working at a licensed firm. You just have to be working certified by a licensed CPA in
Exactly.
good standing.
Yes, that is what the rules say as far as the experience requirement goes.
Yes, I mean, if she went to work for a corporation and had a CPA supervisor, she would qualify, right?
Yes,
And that's going to
definitely.
be H&R Block's position, that they're a big corporation.
She's providing accounting services
Public accounting services.
out of an unregistered firm.
Mr. Carker, can you give me the citation for the rule, just because I'm not seeing it, for the experience piece?
I've got it, Mr. Roberts. It's 0020-02-.03, and I think you're looking at section 1B. First sentence, applicant shall have his or her experience verified to the board by a licensee as defined in the act or a licensee from another state. And it goes on to say what acceptable experience shall include.
What's that reference again?
0020-02-.03, item 1B.
Where does it state anything about having to work for a licensed firm?
Not in the experience section, it doesn't. It just says a licensee. I think, and Mark, if I'm misstating what you're saying, please say so, but I think Mark is saying by the black letter of the rule, the experience can be verified by this licensee. However, there may be a secondary issue of whether or not, at minimum, the CPA who is signing off on this experience, if not the applicant because she's not yet licensed, practicing out of an unregistered company. So they may be separate questions. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying, Mark?
I think it is. The issue here, Stephen, is that they are providing accounting services by definition, by our definition. Tax preparation is an accounting service, and you have a CPA who's providing that service out of an unregistered firm. That
Right.
is technically a violation.
So if I opened up Stephen's tax practice and I kept my CPA license up, kept all my CPE and kept in compliance, but when I signed those returns, I just signed them as me, not as Stephen Eldridge CPA. Is that within the law?
That would be a violation, the way that our law reads.
But if I'm not, or say I relinquished my CPA license and opened up Stephen's tax service and decided to prepare tax returns as me, is that there's no violation there?
No violation there.
So because this person happens to hold a CPA license, it creates the conflict.
It seems to me what we're saying, Mark, is that H&R Block cannot hire CPAs to work for them.
That's what I'm getting at with
That is
that.
correct.
Wouldn't be just H&R Block, by the way. I mean, you're not going
Yeah.
to stop there. You go to Liberty Tax Service and
Yeah, no, but I'm
Yeah.
just, it seems to me that there's a problem somewhere in there. I don't know if we can prevent H&R Block from hiring CPAs to work for them. That sounds, that's a pretty big step.
If they retired their license or went inactive or whatever the status is, does that fix the problem? Is it because they have an
I don't
active
think
license?
that'd be satisfactory for H&R Block. I think they would want to have some technical staff to deal with tax issues.
No, I agree. I'm just trying to get to the root of this. I mean, is it because it's an active license or?
I think it's any license, Stephen. I think they would have to get their license up.
So I guess with this, we're either going to require H&R Block to be registered as a CPA firm, or we're going to deny all these requests based on the rules that I'm hearing. Is that a fair statement?
Just to make sure I'm clear on this, when looking at the code, it talks about acceptable experience, and I think it says in the rules as well. says this experience will be acceptable if it is gained through employment in government, industry, academia, or public practice. Seems like potentially the H&R Block would come under industry, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's contemplated. Or are you saying that the H&R Block experience should be public practice, but it doesn't qualify as public practice because the firm isn't licensed? I just want to make sure I understand the differentiation.
Okay, I'm saying that since they're providing third-party services, they are providing tax returns for those outside the company. For the public, those tax services are considered providing accounting services in the state of Tennessee. And under our rules and regulations, if you are a CPA, then you must work out of a registered firm in order to provide accounting services.
So I think that means that we'd be saying this experience that this applicant would be having would be qualified as public practice, but for the fact that H&R Block doesn't qualify in Tennessee as public practice because it's not registered for accounting services. I'm just trying to figure out how we would say no to this under the rules.
I don't think we can say no to her request. I think that she's got adequate person vouching for her experience. I think the other issue becomes then, is it a violation of our rules? So, my recommendation is to grant the request, but then there's the secondary issue is does a CPA practicing in a non-licensed firm such as H&R Block violate our rules? Is that
I think you're on the right base.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think we have grounds, in my opinion, we have grounds to accept this request.
I mean, you've got, this issue goes beyond this. You've got outsourced accounting providers out there that are not licensed CPA firms. You've got contract CFO type companies that are not licensed CPA firms.
And what about like paychecks and payroll providers?
Business process outsourcing, yeah, paychecks. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of businesses that, depending on how we're going to define this, that this could apply to. But I agree with you. I mean, I think her application meets the test, and I would agree with that. This other issue, I think once you start peeling back the onion, you can get into a lot of issues there.
Agreed. That's why it's here.
My recommendation, I guess for sake of time too, is that we grant this individual's application request, and then we may bring this up for discussion tomorrow to see how we want to pursue it, because I think it is a bigger issue than one person practicing at one office of some company. So assuming y'all agree, I'll ask for a motion to grant acceptance of this application request for licensure.
So move.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? I mean, is this something we want to add to the agenda tomorrow, the issue of how do we want to handle this? Because, I mean, from what I'm hearing is that our rules, all these firms and whatever you want to call them, H&R Blocks and those type of entities are in violation of our rules if the CPAs working in those companies are in violation of our rules.
My only recommendation is, since we're talking about H&R Block in particular being a national company, I can't imagine that we're the first state board of accountancy to consider this issue. So my only thought is I would be interested in gathering some intelligence from other executive directors that we know to find out if anyone else has addressed this issue, and if so, how. I mean, I just don't want to be necessarily the pioneer, if possible.
I agree.
Is this an issue that NASBA has looked into?
I'm not sure that NASBA's looked at it very much, Henry. This has been problematic, I think, going back for a number of years. H&R Block and their hiring of CPAs.
Can you put us together some information for our next meeting for this to be discussed as an item? I assume you've got the NASBA convention. That may be an opportunity to speak to some folks about, isn't that coming up in November?
Yes, it is.
I'm just interested in finding out if any other boards have considered the issue. If so,
What they do.
yeah, and why? I mean, just so that we're at least benefiting from their discussion.
Is it an issue? It sounds like it is a violation of our laws if we ignore it and just let it continue to happen. So either we need to adjust the rules or just our rules, or make additional, make them get compliant.
I will remind you that not too long ago, you disciplined a firm for operating with CPAs and their employee, an unregistered firm, and the CPAs resigned from that firm in order to avoid complaints against themselves individually.
We'll just put together, we can briefly discuss it tomorrow, and then I guess it would be that he'll provide us a presentation at our next meeting if everybody's agreeable to that. Okay, the last item I have is a CPE audit report. Who wants to present that for us?
That would be Ms. Condon. She's the one who did the CPE audits. I'll let her address it for you.
This year, we audited 506 licenses. The vast majority of those licenses were compliant with no issues at all, 90% of them. Another 9% were non-compliant, meaning that they were short in some area and were given penalty hours. All of them have 180 days to rectify their shortages. This is the first year that we offered online submissions for CPE, and 34% of the licensees responded online. Almost half of the licensees responded by email. I know that we're discussing tomorrow the rulemaking hearing, a penalty for not having state ethics, and only 3% of the licenses in audit were lacking their state ethics, and all of them have since completed that requirement.
This is an easier audit year for y'all?
I think next year it will be an easier audit year. This year was getting used to the system, but I've had some really good feedback from CPAs about the online tool.
Oh, it's going to be better next year.
It'll be easier for me next year.
I was just curious, since we changed, if you feel good about the process.
I think so.
Okay. That's all the items I have. Does anybody have anything else for discussion?
You got a question?
We have a question?
I believe I was on the agenda as well.
I don't have you on the agenda, but
Yes, she's here.
it's not on my email, so I'll be glad to invite you to the podium.
State-specific ethics course.
State-specific
Now that
ethics.
you're out of time, right? The topic that I wanted to talk to y'all about today was the state-specific ethics program. And just to recap, licensees are required to get 2 hours every renewal period in a board-approved ethics program that focuses on the laws and rules of the state. So it looks like there's roughly 17 approved programs across the state. Although each of these programs is approved by this committee and the board, there don't appear to be any provisions to oversight or follow up on those programs at a later time, either the program or the instructors. So some of the concerns we've had or we've heard of this has led to some quality issues, some inconsistency in the product that's being delivered. TSCPA has also been in contact with NASBA's Center for Public Trust, and they've received some significant feedback from Big Four firms, primarily from their young CPA staff, that they would really like to see a more engaging, more efficient, consistent program available online 24/7. TSCPA feels like this is a good avenue to go with this. As a result, the Center for Public Trust has agreed to provide content and help state societies produce a product that might meet the needs of those that were providing the feedback. So we feel like it would be better to have one solid, consistent program that could be easily oversighted and would provide that one consistent message to the licensees. So we are encouraging the board to consider approving one provider of this program. The TSCPA is in a position to do that. We would work in collaboration with the Center for Public Trust, industry leaders, Mark, Doug Warren, pulling their expertise, as well as working with instructional design firms to create an online product that's more engaging, that would include things such as video, potentially gamification, immediate feedback on, are you learning the content, are you grasping it? Again, available online 24/7. We still feel like, and as I'm sure I've heard from the board before, that Mark going out and speaking to large groups is also beneficial in putting a face with this board, and who better to deliver the content. So I think that that's what we'd like this group to talk about today, and to hopefully propose a recommendation to the board. So if y'all would like to discuss or have any questions of me, be happy to answer.
The request is to basically make the TSCPA the sole provider of this state-specific ethics program.
Correct.
Where would the state, like, as you mentioned, where would those presentations where Mark or his staff go out and present ethics to groups, where would that, how would that
They could
impact
use the
that?
content. I mean, most of what we would do would be providing the online product, but that could also be formatted in a way that he could use it to make live presentations.
Would another vendor use that material to go present for a charge?
You know, I think it's a possibility, but I think the way we've looked at it is that part of the concern is the consistency over the delivery of the message. And so one consistent message with a limited number of folks presenting that, or methods for delivery, is probably best for the licensee. But, you know, it might be an option as we work through the details.
Those be worked out.
Well, I think we're kind of we've been gathering information from software vendors, from NASBA, from instructional design firms. So we're trying to figure out what it's going to take to put something like this together, and we're prepared to move forward. I think that we'd like to work closely with board staff on putting something like this together. So, you know, we could certainly do that between now and the next board meeting. I guess I'd like some feedback from you on what exactly questions that you want answered, maybe that one and any additional ones.
Well, as I understand it, the proposal is that TSCPA be the sole provider of
Right.
the CPE. So my first question is, as of when?
Oh, we prepared to do it by around June, halfway into next year. We feel like we could have something in place by June of next year.
So is it the request of this board that if the board decides to do that, that they would do it effective June or some date subsequent to that next year?
Correct. And I guess it might be easier to do it at the beginning of a renewal cycle. Maybe January would be a better, but yes, at least June, if not after. Of 2016. Mm-hmm.
And allow proper notice to other folks who are now
Correct.
distributing, right?
Correct.
The only exception would be that the board staff would be able to continue giving the classes when they're asked to.
They would use the
You said
same,
exclusive for the TSCPA, but with the exception that the board staff would continue to be able to go out and speak to the chapters as they're requested.
Correct. For the limited, I'm not sure what number it's set at now. 20 individuals or?
20 is the minimum.
they would use that same material that y'all would provide to them.
Correct.
Anticipate a request from the board to help with funding of the development of this ethics software or gaming system or whatever it may be?
Are we requesting financial contribution from the board?
Or do you anticipate doing that?
No, we feel like we ought to be able to absorb the costs in that.
Center for Public Trust going to have any financial involvement?
They will only be providing content. They wouldn't be providing financial support to us.
Yes, CPA were the sole provider of this, what?
We have to charge a fee in order to recover. I mean, the idea is that we would cover our costs and are hopeful for a very minimal fee, something around a $25 mark.
I mean, that goes to my question.
Yeah.
What safeguards are there in place to make sure that if we grant the TSCPA sole a monopoly?
Right.
What safeguards are there to make sure that our licensees are treated fairly on price?
Right. Well, what we could do is, is there a chance that we work in collaboration where not only the product is reviewed as well as pricing strategy with the board and some sort of approval that's a secondary approval? We could work on something.
You could bring it back to our May meeting for a final approval on the price.
Well, or you could just have an annual budget submitted that simply would, I mean, it's no different than when we price our dues here, right? I mean, we've got a budget that suggests whether we have to increase dues or decrease dues. And no one expects the TSCPA necessarily to do this for nothing. By the same token, monopoly gives rise to the opportunity to.
Well, so maybe the approval is with the condition that the product is submitted along with the budget.
For approval
surrounding
each year?
that. I'm sorry?
For approval each year?
For approval each
By
year?
the board each year? That'd be,
That's acceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand.
May I ask a question or several?
Jump in.
Thanks. So we're talking about sole source, which brings to mind two things. Number one, what does this mean for the providers who have already obtained approval from this board to teach the 2-hour state-specific ethics CPE course? Does that mean that the board is taking the position, if they grant that they say, okay, well, we withdraw our prior approval, and if so, on what basis? I mean, especially if their course is the same or identical as it was at the time when it was approved. And then I think to Vic's point, the other main question is, I understand all of this about making sure that there are price controls and things like that, but, anything is possible to the extent that there might be a falling out or something like that, and especially if there is a rule change or something that sets forth the TSCPA as the sole source provider, and this is nothing against them as an organization, this is a general commentary. Head of the TSCPA has a falling out with our board at some future date, but they are the only provider authorized to give 2 hours of education that every licensee has to have. What then do the licensees do if it got bad or serious?
We have the right to change the rules based on this other precedence. We've approved these other vendors, and we've decided, and I'm just speaking hypothetically, if we decide to do this, we've decided that it's better for our members to pursue this route, and if that becomes not the best route to go, we could always change it and pursue a different route, could we not?
And we're not asking for a change in the rule. So the rule states that a program approved by the board, so that would give you the leeway, I think, to approve what you feel is best for the licensees.
So do you anticipate I don't know this because I'm not an accountant in Tennessee, but I'm assuming that you don't have to join the association if you're a CPA in
No.
Tennessee. So would there be a pricing differential for people who are members versus non-members?
Typically in our CPE events now, that's the case. We had not made a determination yet on how that would look going forward.
I think that's something that this board needs to consider, and this committee does too, because we in fact represent all of the licensees and not just those who have chosen to join the association. So whenever this comes up, I think we need to make sure we understand that piece of it. I think Mr. Whitaker also brings up a really good point about the 17 or so organizations that have been approved to provide state-based ethics. I think that if we go to a sole source type arrangement, my opinion would be we need to have a justification for doing that. And I know we talked about there's been some concerns over quality and consistency, but perhaps this is an opportunity for us to kill two birds with one stone. Earlier, we were talking about looking at exempt organizations that provide CLE, or CPE, sorry. CLE is a legal thing. So maybe this is the same idea we could do. We could do a pilot project by looking at these 17 organizations that do the state-based ethics, looking for consistency or something like that. If the committee agrees, we can first of all figure out if this is a good option for us to go with the TSCPA thing. And then secondly, we can use what we've learned from that to kind of deploy as a audit of the exempt organizations that do other CPE. Just an idea.
And I appreciate those comments. I'm also concerned whether or not this board, and this is directed to you, Mr. Whitaker, whether this board is subjecting itself to a potential claim for restraint of trade or something along those lines if it were to take the position of sole sourcing.
Not practicing in the restraint of trade area of the law all the time, I couldn't offer you anything definitive, but I would say that on the spectrum of risk anyway, the farther you get towards sole source with minimal or not very compelling justification, the bigger the risk the board runs in terms of problems in that direction. The farther away you get from that, then less so. I would say at least some of the questions I've raised would be severely lessened if this was sort of in addition to or not instead of, or if the board wanted to say going forward, we're not going to authorize any new vendors to do this, but maybe the folks who are already in are in, or something. I have questions, and it doesn't mean that this would be possible under no circumstances. It just seems like there's going to be quite a bit of consideration and thinking before we move forward with anything that would bind the board and all of the licensees of the state. That's all.
Wendy, what detriment is there to the TSCPA if the existing vendor sets up a 24/7 online accessible, quote-unquote, better product?
I think just obviously the more licensees that we have come through us, the lower we can price the product.
Right.
So I mean, if we're likely to go down this road anyway for our product. Anyway, now whether we can have the price point where we'd like to see it, that's what I'm not sure of unless we're the sole provider of the product. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The reason I asked the question is, the concerns of the board, I understand what you're saying, but the concerns of the board are separate and apart from
Right.
that. For all the things that we've discussed here.
Right.
And I'm trying to understand how important that the sole source component is.
I think to me it's important to the licensees simply because, and it should be important to the board because, how are you guaranteed that when rule changes take effect, they may be disseminated to these sponsors, but how are you ensured that they're incorporating those into their program? How are you assured that the individuals that are speaking for that organization are incorporating those correctly, even live in Tennessee and have a basic understanding of the laws and rules here? Yeah, they're all everyone's supposed to follow the guidelines provided, but with no regular follow-up or evaluation or oversight of what's going on now, we feel like that's more a benefit for the licensees. We'd of course like to, we can bring the price point down and make it even better if we're the single source. And it also provides a consistent message from a few folks that are very connected to the topic that's being presented.
Two questions, kind of more for Mark and staff, but would this, what we discussed earlier with the certified financial group that we approved, and we talked about having an annual audit of this, would these providers fall under that audit process we discussed, of reviewing their CPE content each year? Or is
I
this
think
a
they
separate?
would, Stephen. you know, the basic outlines that we've seen of the ethics courses that are being provided are basically the same. I mean, they're all the same material as far as we can determine. I mean, you've got an outline that everyone has to follow, and you've got to incorporate this and this and this, and they're all doing that. I think Wendy raises a good issue. Is it being presented effectively? We don't know that since we don't go to the courses.
Well, we have somebody attend, I guess we would have somebody that monitors this course, correct?
Yes.
Have we had any complaints about substandard state-specific ethics CPE or any issues with it that we know about?
None that I have heard, no.
Virginia has incorporated this similar model as an example. They are, I think it's effective March or June of 2015.
The Virginia Society provides, they're the sole provider of state-specific ethics?
Yes.
That'd be something that we may want to review and see how they approach this.
And if I can just add one more thing, something that brought to mind, we did a new board member orientation for Ms. Moon today, and part of that involves things coming down the line from, you know, the administration and kind of the governing philosophy, if you will, when it comes to board matters. And one of the things that was emphasized at this and every other orientation is to regulate no more than is required. And so I'm not saying don't do this, but just understand that however this goes or doesn't, that question is likely to be asked at some point. You know, is this required or not? And, you know, sort of secondarily under that, if someone says, okay, well, if the TSCPA's product is the best, greatest thing on the market, and they are the biggest provider of that, and therefore can set the price point best, won't the free market kind of take care of itself, and these other folks, approval or not, will eventually find themselves without people enrolling for their services. Again, I don't mean to suggest that whether or not the board can or should do this, just things for this committee and the larger board as a whole to consider as we go through the process.
More questions on this or discussion points? Or are we prepared to make a recommendation, or is this something we need to explore further or discuss with the full board? I'd be interested in hearing what the Virginia Society or Virginia State Board did on this as well.
How they did it.
Right.
I mean, to answer some of the questions I was asking about.
And also confirmation that we're not violating any kind of state law by, you know, allowing a monopoly on this type of service.
I'd like to add, too, I'd like to know about the verification of complaints about substandard state-based ethics. We haven't received anything, but can we investigate a little bit and see if we can verify some of the reasons? I mean, because I understand that would be the justification for us doing this if we did it.
I have some information on the Virginia that I can certainly maybe discuss tomorrow, or if it's from a time perspective, if we want to wait till the next meeting, that's fine. I do have some of the information. It's all available on their website.
Wendy, as I understand it, from what we've talked about here, if we were to grant the TSCPA the right to be the only group to provide this CPE course, you all would charge, for example, $25 a course. If we didn't do that, if we left the 17 people that are currently providing the course in place and let them continue doing what they're doing, then you all come in, or you all just continue on as another provider of the same course, then you would charge $125 for the course, or some much larger figure.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I think that's the
But keep in
kind of
mind,
the bottom line of what you're saying.
yeah, and keep in mind, I know that the minutes from the last meeting show some concern from this board about approving several applications, about the oversight aspect of it. Is it better being presented by the board exclusively? So those things have come up in discussion recently. So this was really kind of a proposal to solve some of the concerns that we've heard. And really just that. But yes, I mean, we're going to move forward with revamping our product and hopefully creating something a little more engaging for the licensees.
Wendy, the information you have about Virginia, does that include their discussion and analysis of like some of the issues we've discussed today?
Vic, it does, no, it includes the policy that they passed, so it outlines their policy, and then it has some frequently asked questions about, now that the program is in place, how does it work? So as far as what the board considered, what type of information that they got, no, I don't have that.
But I'm assuming their discussions are public record, like ours, I would think. I mean, is that generally true, Mark?
They should be, yes.
That's what I'm really interested in
Yeah,
trying
me
to
too.
understand is how they came to that policy decision, how they came to that,
Okay.
discussions that took place that led to that.
Right.
Because if this board were to choose to take that kind of action, I would want to understand how they got there. Because part of my concern right now is I'm not sure, other than the fact that it might reduce cost for members, how we tell potentially other CPE providers. I mean, so let's say somebody, offers this CPE and that's their sole source of income, and we tell them, no, we're not going to let you do it anymore. And then they sue us for putting them out of business or restrain a trader. I'm just.
Right. Is there any consideration to not approving additional courses until we kind of work through this?
If I may, the rules give the board authority to approve or disapprove requests for authority to teach CPE coursework. So I think the board has the authority to do that, provided that it's consistent in its application.
I'd make a motion that this committee consider recommending to the board that we not approve any other CPE courses while we study this particular issue. With 17 providers out there, I don't think we're harming the public in any way.
Just to be clear, you're talking solely about the 2-hour state-specific ethics and
Just
not...
to be clear, I'm talking about the
Okay.
2-hour state-specific. Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
I would second that motion. Second anything I want to, okay? If you want to second it, I'll take
go
my
ahead.
second
You're-
back.
That's fine, that's fine.
You want to third it?
I'll third it.
So before
All
we
right.
vote, does that mean, we're talking about a year maybe, potentially, moratorium, or 6 months, or?
I would think within 1 or 2 board meetings, we should be able to come to a conclusion on this. So about 6 months, we'll have a pretty good idea where we're heading.
No issue with me seconding a motion, correct? I'll rescind it and let Henry second it, just to be safe.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion. We have a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Good.
Now I think that's the last time. Thank you.
I just wanted to tell Wendy, we talked about this issue several times in several board meetings, and the TSCPA has moved quite a bit forward in trying to reach some kind of a position on this whole thing, and I'm very pleased with that.
Thank you.
Done a very good job.
Mr. Chairman, there is one more issue for you to address. If you'll look on your iPad under R. Scott Hoffman. Late addition to the iPads. He's requesting that you grant him a CPA license.
This has to do with the rule change when he let's see, when he graduated, he had 133 hours back in 1980. 133 hours were sufficient to complete the curriculum as well as qualify to sit for the CPA exam. I assume he's applying now and doesn't have 150 hours.
Right, so he doesn't qualify for a reciprocal license under the 150-hour rule. And our rules say, if you don't qualify with 150 hours, then you must have 4 years of experience, the type described in Section 62-1-106F, or meets equivalent requirements prescribed by the board by rule after passing the examination upon which the applicant's certificate was based, and within the 10 years immediately preceding the application. And his experience was back in 1983.
So he's saying of the previous 10 years, starting now, he's had 4 years, he's practiced 4 years in public accounting.
He is not. That's the issue. Our rules state that if you want a reciprocal license, you've got to have that experience.
How many years you got to have?
4 years than the last 10.
Okay, never mind. Okay, I'll read it now.
Is it your understanding he's gonna practice public accounting?
I don't think he wants to practice. I think he just wants a designation, Vic. But if you give him the license, he has that.
But he's been licensed in North Carolina for 30 years, in Florida for 20 years.
Yes.
So what is our rule for reciprocal licensing? You have to have the 150 hours?
You have to have the 150 hours, or the applicant has had, I'm at 62-1-107. What is this? Subsection C1B. It says the applicant had 4 years of experience of the type described in section 62-1-106F. And 106F says, experience shall include providing any type of service or advice involving the use of accounting, attest, management advisory, financial advisory, tax, or consulting skills. So that's the experience he's got to have. 4 years of that experience, sometime within the last 10.
If he'd taken 17 more hours of basket weaving, he would have been compliant.
And the fact that he is evidently a securities broker, that type of activity, investment business, I'm sorry, that type of activity wouldn't be considered as consulting?
Wouldn't the term financial consulting, wouldn't it?
That's my question,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
We have not in the past considered that, but if you all want to consider it financial
I'm just asking
consulting, we
based on
can.
what you read,
Yeah.
because, and it doesn't say that you have to have 4 years under a CPA firm, from what I heard.
No.
When did the rule change to the 150 that he's talking about?
Even I want to say that was back in 1989 or 1990.
But one time, he would have been able to get licensed in Tennessee without anything different.
I just think given the type of qualifications that he has, the 2 CPA licenses and the various series licenses, the investment series licenses, those are pretty sophisticated licenses. And I mean, unless there's something in the definition says that we can't consider that like the 4 years, I would be inclined to consider it.
Does the board have discretion to waive those requirements?
I guess that's why you're the attorney member. I shouldn't have put you on this committee, should we?
Well, we're not waiving a requirement. We're interpreting that this experience is considered
that
adequate
requirement.
experience.
Yeah, that's where I would prefer to go.
Right, I would too. I mean, and it doesn't specify it has to be with a CPA firm. It just says it
No.
needs to be related experience, correct?
Yes.
Yes, and it threw in there consulting, which.
Right.
Well, and by rule, the definition of accounting services includes consulting and management advisory services.
That, in my opinion, is what this is. Again, I'm just
But
reading the title. I mean, I don't know all the specifics, but I'm assuming.
And that's where I would rather,
I would too.
Okay.
I move that we grant him reciprocity
Based on
based on him qualifying, that the work that he's done qualifying as 4 years out of the past 10 years under this rule.
Motion, do I have a second?
Before we continue motioning, I have a question to clarify. We're granting him a Tennessee license? That's, okay, because reciprocity, I mean, he could come in based on his North Carolina license and just work here if his principal place of business wasn't here. But just so the record is clear, you guys are voting to recommend that the board give him a license, which is fine under the legal rationale we were talking about. I just wanted, for somebody who's watching the tape back, to be clear.
Right. And that's the, I'm sorry, go ahead. Under 106F, it talks about financial advisory services as being relevant experience. So I think that's how we, just for the record, I think that's where we were going with it.
Excuse me.
Yeah, the only reason I used term reciprocity was the first sentence in his letter, so, but thank you for the clarification. So I will amend my motion that we grant him a license based on having 4 out of 10 years of relevant experience.
A motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any more hidden agenda items?
Nope, that's it.
We need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Committee's adjourned.
You're far too happy, Mr. Eldridge.
It's a good mood. I got here on time.
No, I didn't say that. I wasn't implying that. I just not surprised.
Call to order the meeting for the Law and Rules Committee. And the first item is the internship. And I believe this is 2002.02. It reads right now, this is section 1B. It reads, not more than 3 semester or 4 quarter hours may be internship programs, which may be applied to the 30 semester or 45 quarter hours in accounting. And I believe we are considering changing that from the 3 hours to 6 hours or 8 quarter hours in compliance with what many universities do right now. So I know, speaking from the University of Memphis, I know they accept 6 internship hours.
What's that rule number again?
Yes, it's 20-02.02 under education. So we're looking at the total 24 semesters or 36 quarter hours in general business, and this is the part applying to the accounting requirement. So right now, the accounting requirement is 30 semester or 45 quarter hours of accounting education, including the elementary level. And right now, we specify a limitation of 3 semester hours or 4 quarter hours for internship, that is accounting internships. And we're considering changing this or raising this limit to 6 hours rather than just 3 for undergraduate accounting credit.
So that's consistent with what universities currently allow their
Right,
students, the
so-
maximum.
Right, so universities, University of Memphis, I know, currently allows 6 accounting internship credits, which right now it would be in conflict since the rule states a limit of 3.
I assume that means, just refresh it, they sign up to do an internship and they get the semester hours and they get credit and they go out and they work at a CPA firm or a public account.
They might work for a
government.
in a corporate accounting office, but most of the time it's either regional or large CPA firms that they're interning in. And they have, set requirements they have to present to get internship credit in accounting. So it has to be very specific to get the accounting credit. So the question is, I think probably in the initial consideration is that these 3 semesters, the 3 hours or the 4 quarter hours, because if you increase it to 6, you could be essentially taking away an accounting course in the classroom, because of our requirement is 30 hours in accounting. So the question is, would the 3 internship hours be as valuable or more valuable than the 3 hours in the classroom? So that, I think, is the question. Yes.
Sorry, I'm not a member of the committee, but like in the prior committee meeting, it would be very helpful if management had a recommendation.
Management have a recommendation.
Management feels I can see it both ways. However, since we have raised the accounting requirement to that 30 hours, I can see an additional 3 hours going toward internship. On the other hand, you are denying them or not requiring them to have that 3 hours in classroom, which may benefit them more on the exam. You don't think so? You think the internship program would be more beneficial?
I'd save 3 hours worth of tuition.
Pardon?
It might save some tuition costs.
Oh.
The courses that are required to take the CPA exam, or the material, is going to be covered by the student anyway. And oftentimes, they're covering it even though they've had a class.
It's true.
So, I would love to say that the classroom's always valuable, but I, speaking from experience, cannot make that statement. The question is whether the internships are always valuable.
Yeah.
And I've seen an awful lot of students, most of them get a huge value out of the internships. So.
Well, the other thing that's kind of rolling around in the back of my mind, and I am not opposed to the 6 hours of internship at all, but the other thing that's kind of rolling around in the back of my mind is are you allowing then work experience to substitute for the required education?
Well, it's not work. There is a big difference between work experience and internship. So internships are supervised. They have a set list of objectives they must accomplish. They have, at the university, they have a portfolio they have to put together. So it's quite a bit of work in addition to what they're doing in the outside work experience. So there is a classroom element. I'm sure that's required at every university because they are getting credit for it. So it isn't like for example, if you are currently employed and you then try to file for that to be your internship, we deny it most of the time because that's not the same thing.
Right. Management has no objection to the 6 hours. Personally, I think it would be a good use of the time, but I just want to throw that work experience thing out there because that has come up in the past.
Right.
About substituting work experience for education.
I think the initial reason this came on was that we are not consistent, whether it's consistent that we publicize more to the universities that they only offer 3 hours of accounting internship credit, or we change our rule, because right now there's an inconsistency. So we have students who expect that is going to count towards their this requirement and then find out it's not.
Right. And I think that's actually what brought this up, Dr. Spiceland.
Are the students are there requirements of X number of hours each? Admin type working in the firms or the companies?
So for it to be accounting a credit, they have to perform accounting duties. It cannot be administrative. and they must require they are required to have 150 hours to get 3 hours credit, 300 hours to get 6 hours credit.
I think in light of your explanation about how students are getting caught, they're looking at what their universities allow for the degree, and they don't realize maybe at their early stages that there's this board and there might be something different for getting their license. I think it's probably good to marry them up. And also, I mean, as a student, you have that choice. I mean, I know when I don't have a CPA, but I have a law degree. You know, I thought about, you know, do I want to take these classes to pass the bar, or do I want to have real life experience? And every student kind of knows their personality and what they're training for and how they're going to prepare. So it's only 6 hours. I mean, it's not. It is a lot of hours, but it's not. It's really just 2 classes, I guess. And that real life work experience for when you get out into the profession, I mean, the early mentoring that you get, there's nothing that can replace that for, you know, how you develop in your professional life. So I'll make a motion that we accept, I make a motion that we recommend to the board that we change this rule, sorry, I'll get my, change rule 0020-02-.021B, so that it says not more than 6 semester or 8 quarter hours may be internship programs.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. And the second item on the agenda is to review or discuss the status of the Tennessee State Board policy statements. I believe that is on our iPad as well as I printed mine out. So my understanding is that these have, this is dated 2008, July 25th, 2008 was the last time that we put this together. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mark?
Mhm.
So we're looking at several items on here that have been outdated or that have been changed, corrected, and we need to bring this document up to date. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I think the staff would like us to do this as a committee, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Ladies. So, and I believe all of them reference specific rules. Is that correct? So we're just, it's summarizing the rules out of the law book?
It's not really a summary. What they're doing is they're trying to give you a reference as to what the policy is referring to help you understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Okay.
Let's see, for example,
Yes.
I was not familiar that this set of policies were out there. We don't refer to them very often. When I discovered that they were there, I was astounded at how out of date they were. My suggestion, rather than, I think this is going to require a good deal of work, and I would recommend, or my suggestion would be that management come up with the recommendations that the committee ought to consider. But it's a
Of course, management and staff would accept feedback from the committee. Just, we wouldn't turn it down.
Is this in a Word document?
It's on the,
Oh,
it's on our
the
website.
Website as
Uh-huh.
in PDF form or in a Word document form?
Karen, is it PDF or Word?
Everything on the website is in PDF form.
Guess if
I can translate that into a Word document for you.
because even if we went through it, somebody needs to have some track changes ability on the document, so.
Background question. How did these policy statements get put together? Are these, I guess my question is just looking at them, how come these are policy statements versus other things that
Everything.
the board has talked about, like even in the prior committee meeting? I mean, if we're trying to update these and make sure they're inclusive, how do we go about knowing that this is all of the policy statements?
Well, these are the ones that the board has adopted as policies, Jennifer. We have not actually officially adopted anything else as policy since 2008.
We have to officially,
What we've done is we've made individual decisions.
okay. So, not only updating this, but it would be a good exercise in some of the discussions that have happened over the last, 5 years or so, to figure out what other policy statements what other policies should be drawn into here, and then we should adopt as policy statements.
Definitely, yes. And the whole idea here, I think, is you want to adopt policy statements to see if they work, and if they work, then eventually you want to work them into the rules. Your policy statements are guides, and I think that if the guides work, then you want to adopt them as a more formalized part of your operations.
So these are not formally rules?
No,
Okay.
these are policies that the board has adopted. And the difference, Charlene, is these can be changed by the board. The rules have to go through the rulemaking process. You could vote today to do away with all of these or change one or two or whatever. So that's the main difference.
So who uses these?
Theoretically, the board and the staff.
Board and the staff. I guess my fear is that, why are we not just using the rules?
Because we have these policies to follow.
I guess you could say policy statements kind of provide a little more guidance maybe on how the board has chosen to interpret rules. And I'm not sure, that may be too, but it's kind of like a policy overlay on this is how we're going to treat this this issue, and it allows a little more consistency from board to board versus a board just, each board, as new members come and go, things change. These might be policies that we've decided you want to have a little more consistency for giving the staff maybe some guidance on, like the first one on, applicants having to give additional information when they're convicted of a felony before sitting to the CP. I guess they're just to provide some consistent policies that for which the board and the staff to operate in as there are changes that are coming and going on a daily basis sometimes.
Right. For example, Dr. Spiceland, if you'll look under Roman numeral 2, number 2, policy to renew it as an active CPA certificate. The board continues to require a minimum of 20 hours of CPE each year for the renewal of an active CPA certificate. The CPE carryover is provided for cannot be used to meet the 20-hour minimum CPE requirement per year. We use that, but it's nowhere in the rules. So, and I'm being recorded, aren't I? Technically, if someone wanted to challenge this and say, yes, I do have my 20-hour minimum because I had carryover hours, all we have is a board policy to back that up.
Understand that, and this is more legal, and so maybe Jennifer will kind of get where I'm trying to go with this, but the closer something comes to affecting a licensee's substantive property or license rights, the more it needs to be a rule. The more it's for administrative staff or management guidance in the day-to-day operation of board business and things of that nature, the more likely it could and should be policy. So, using Mark's example there, if that is the sole thing standing between someone and the renewal of their license, there's a strong and non-frivolous argument to be made that that affects the property right to renew that license. So, again, if challenged, then we would cross that bridge when we came to it, but in a clash between rule and policy, rule always prevails because that has gone through the rulemaking process under the board's authority from the legislature and legislative review prior to enactment.
So does management feel like we need a policy? Because it almost, again, sounds like if we've got something here that could, that is not actually a rule, but we're following it, we're going to get, that's going to be kicked out anyway. So is there, it almost seems better to not have the policy because we don't want to follow policy if it's not stipulated as a rule.
Well, and I think that's part of Mr. Crocker's reasoning for both committee and staff and management to take a look at this to see which of these still work, which fall within the framework we just mentioned, and others which, might need to be tossed. But to just, even though because they're policies, the committee and the full board has authority to toss these tomorrow in their entirety if they feel like it. If there are things that are useful in here that are within the scope of the board's authority and proper under the rules that do work, then arguably those could and should be kept in place. But anything that doesn't work or is not under that scope of authority might need to go. But to just do that with really nobody having conducted an in-depth review is probably a little premature.
Well, obviously it hadn't been used a lot since I had no knowledge of it either. I don't know how many people have.
I think there are several examples in it that indicate that whether we need it or not is one question, but if we're going to have it, it is in desperate need of updating. Mm-hmm. For example, it says that the minutes of the meetings are to be submitted to the secretary within 2 weeks of the meeting. At the last meeting, the question came up in the election of officers, and that I looked in the rule book, and there was nothing in there of term limits. Yet there's a policy in there that says no officer can serve in that position more than 2 years. And it identifies committees in there that we don't have, and so.
Also says something about a board retreat every
2
years. So, but,
I guess the question, if we were going to revisit these and bring them up to date, determine if there's anything else to add, and then, think about whether we want to continue with these, I'm having trouble. I'd like to do my part and do whatever I can, but I guess I need guidance because I feel like I don't know enough to be able to recommend what policies maybe various committees have discussed over the past couple of years or what's been changed from these. So I want to know how to help. I don't want to dump on staff, but I'm not quite sure. Even if I took some of these home, I'm going to call staff and say, I'll look at the minutes, but I don't think the minutes are going to tell me some of these things committees might have talked about that might be appropriate for this. So I guess I'm sitting here conflicted on how best to use everybody's valuable time, and I don't want to dump on staff. So
I'm afraid I'm going to agree with Jennifer. I wouldn't know where to begin because I'm not sure how. I'm sure someone went to put a lot of effort and time into putting this together, but I don't know the history of it.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Let staff take a shot at redrafting, if you will. We'll send things out to you for wording and let you look at it. We'll decide what recommendations we want to make as far as what we think needs to be a rule as opposed to a policy, and pull them out that way, and we'll get something back to you at the next board meeting.
That Sounds like an excellent idea. Do we need a motion on that?
No, ma'am, we'll
I
just do
move
it.
that we dump. Sorry.
I have no other items. Is there anything else that we need to consider?
No, ma'am, I think that was it.
I have a motion.
I move that we adjourn.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Then we shall adjourn. Thank you.
Ms. Moon, just for future reference, you got to lean up to speak into this because when the red light's on, it is catching your recording on the film in the back, but when it's not, then it's not.
Of the Enforcement Committee to order, and I believe this committee has previously been known as the Probable Cause Committee. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, sir.
And I don't know, changed that name, was that Bill Boffus or Mark or?
We did a survey of all the other surrounding states and to see what committees they had going. And Enforcement Committee was the typical name they used for the Disciplinary Action Committee. So we decided perhaps that would be a little bit more explanatory than probable cause.
I have never served on this committee, and Jennifer just remarked to me that she has not. So, Vic, I believe you have served before on this committee, and Don, you've served multiple times. Gabe, have you been on this? You have been on it before, so probably some people here more capable of serving as chairman than I am. But looking at the purpose of the committee is to review the review and oversight of the investigation and legal action program and recommend disposition of cases. And I guess there are two things on our agenda today, and that's go over to the legal report, which I believe you prepared, Chris, and then the investigative report. So I believe the investigative report is first. Don, have you got some statistics? Are going to present that for us?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. It's in your iPad. Got my memo there. If you look at page 2, you'll see the status of open complaints. We've now got the entire year from January to the present day. I think you'll notice 97 complaints total, up from 38 last quarter. And I know if you're like me, you want to know why. And I think the primary reason that we've seen an increase in the open complaints has to do with the fact that we have now taken on a little more proactive status than reactive. Ray came up with the idea several months ago that we needed to look at the IRS's PTIN listing for the state of Tennessee just to see what the status was and how they were being acknowledged. So he obtained the list and started, I guess you started out by going to just Tennessee. We looked at everybody who was living in Tennessee, listed in Tennessee. Then we excluded the EAs, the attorneys, non-licensees, that sort of thing, and got it down to CPAs. Everyone who claimed to be a CPA and doing tax returns in Tennessee. So what did we come up with? About 6,000 or 7,000? That's what we finally got the number down to.
We got down to about 700 or 800.
Final cut, yeah, because we excluded, of course, all the licensees that we knew that had active license and were working at a firm. So basically, we came down to, I guess, 3 categories of these persons who had told the IRS they were CPAs practicing in Tennessee. The first category, of course, is people who were not CPAs that didn't have a license and were practicing in the state and telling the IRS they were. The second category, I guess, would be those individuals who had a license, an active license in another state, but were now living in Tennessee and holding out as a CPA and doing work here. The third category is those individuals who said they were doing tax returns in the state of Tennessee, but were not part of a licensed firm. In other words, they could be industry, government, whatever. So I guess we got down now to about, 300 complaints total? 300 possible complaints that we're working on, and we basically, as you can see from the jump, we've gotten some of these into the hopper. We're working on them. I think you just saw a firm permit come through that where the individual was identified as not having a firm permit. So this is really hopefully going to give us an opportunity to kind of level the playing field for those individuals who have undergone all the requirements and got their firm permits, and get everybody on the same page. Not to mention those that are holding out as CPAs who are not, in fact, CPAs. I guess that's one of our really big concerns, is those who are telling the IRS and probably the world that they're CPAs. So that's kind of our two-prong approach on this, and that is the reason you see this large increase for the very first time in, I guess, several quarters that we've had more cases than the prior time. And of course, if you look at that wonderful graph on the third page, which I'm not responsible for, but I love, you can see what the status is with us in a nice little pie chart. That's it in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer them.
Anybody have any questions or any thoughts about the, I guess, TPIN numbers and what's going on there, and any comments or feedback?
Just want to say I applaud the proactive effort as opposed to the reactive effort.
Appreciate it.
Do we need to approve that report, I guess, or just recommend? Okay. All right, the next item on the agenda is the legal report, and Chris, I guess we'll turn to you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Should have before you on your iPads a copy of the legal report for this meeting. This was sent to board members in advance via email, and just wanted to note a couple of changes that were recommended by incoming Chair Blofus, and good ones, I might add. Mr. Blofus suggested that it may be of some benefit to be able to allow for block voting on items similarly situated in the way Mr. Royston has sometimes done previously, to group the complaints by recommended disposition. So if you start at the top, these will, from number 1 down to the end of that section, you have recommended dismissals. Then you'll have a section for litigation monitoring placement, a section for cease and desist letters and or then letters of warning, and then we'll end up with the proposed disciplinary action. So that may make it easier when it comes time to vote to say, for example, voting on the recommended dismissals, items number 1 through 17, I believe it is. You just vote on those as recommended or as amended, and then proceed going down by each section. So that may be of some benefit and utility to the committee. On this report, there are more complaints in keeping with what Mr. Mills mentioned. Things of note, in the dismissal section, I would say probably half or so, maybe a little more, have to do with the PTIN numbers. These are matters that were investigated and determined that it doesn't appear for various reasons that these folks needed to have a license or committed a violation, and so on and so forth. And then the cease and desist and letters of warning and other sections kind of speak for themselves. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, and happy to answer any questions or provide additional information on any items about which committee members have questions.
Again, I'm new to this committee, but I traditionally, have you gone through these things in detail? We all saw the written report before the meeting, and I had a chance to read through it. Take the time to go through these individually, Don, or how have you done it in the past? What's been most effective?
Most effective was be sure everybody's read and understands, and then ask particular questions, and then go down just asking for any questions on the group of, like Chris has now organized them, which is a great benefit instead of trying to jump around and say 1, 2, 6, and 9. He's got them classified now by, if it's a Texas reciprocal problem where the Texas has been cleaning their rolls up, and we've had a bunch of, and I don't know why we had so many Texas licensees, but we've gotten a lot of fodder from it in the past that are dismissed or whatever, cases closed. We've been trying to give everybody an opportunity to talk about each case if they needed to, and then when we got into the meat of some of them, let Chris jump in as needed on them.
I'll just start on these TPIN, PTIN cases, and I read these. I guess the thought I had was these complaints were, as I understand, were opened by us. I mean, they weren't brought by somebody else, so they were all opened by the staff. But
Right.
is there any way more efficient? I mean, did you have to open a complaint to get to this level, or pretty quickly resolved? Did it take a lot of time? Is there a better way to? I mean, it's just my reaction was.
Right. Initially, we were opening complaints, Casey, and then we decided, no, that's not the way to go. We're getting more information now before we open the complaints. So what you're seeing here is the first wave of some that we kind of learned from, if you will. So yes, there is a more efficient way to do it, and we're trying to iron that out.
I've read all these recommended dismissals. I believe they number down through number 17, and I guess we'll just ask, has everyone else had a chance to read these, and do you have any comments or questions, or are you ready to make a decision on these?
Question of our investigators, do you all have anything to add to any of these first 17? That any background that there's any reason not to dismiss them? Okay. I'd make a motion that we accept the recommendation of our legal staff in dismissing the complaint on items 1 through 17 of today's report.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion or questions, comments? All right, hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Okay. Then we go to the section recommended placement into litigation monitoring, and I guess we've got really two cases there. I had the question, when I read this, is this even something we ought to be, I guess if they file a complaint, we got to do something with it, but it seems like a dispute that needs to be resolved in the court between a couple individuals that were in the same firm. Chris, any comment or insight here?
No, this is, that's a good point, Casey, and from a 30,000-foot view perspective, I mostly agree with that. However, it would be probably a little premature just from the standpoint that, at least by placing this in litigation monitoring status, it doesn't hurt the board's performance measure numbers, and it also allows the board to retain jurisdiction over the matter in the event that something really crazy or unexpected, or both, that does constitute a violation of the law and rules, comes out and is proven in court. It would put the board in an awkward position, to say the least, having dismissed a complaint before the legal process had run its course, only to find that, for example, a licensee had admitted in a deposition that he engaged in unlawful conduct, that the board should, by right and as a sole entity vested with authority to discipline that person and their license, if that's already been dismissed with prejudice, then that would not be good. So that's the reason for the recommendation here. It seems more likely than not that this could be resolved with no discipline either direction, and that it may just be an employment dispute, but we don't know enough yet, I don't think, because both sides have, once they filed their complaints, kind of clammed up since then a little bit, citing the pending legal process. And since that's typically what we do, or what the board has done historically, when there are matters arising from the same facts set forth in a complaint that are now the subject of litigation, we try to let that run its course and go from there, but the board does always retain the right, and I make sure to put this provision in our lit monitoring consent orders, that it's the board's call as to when and whether to pull cases out and go forward if they had to. If for some reason the board's opinion was, okay, well, this is kind of an emergency public protection situation and we really need to get moving towards a formal hearing, then the board would retain the right to do that. But short of something of that nature, we typically let the court process go forward and then resolve it that way.
Anybody have any questions or comments on this one? Motion for recommended disposition?
So move.
Second the motion.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, these recommended cease and desist letters, I read these, but let's take just a minute. There are two of them, I believe. Let's take just a second and review those again. Have you got any further insight or comment or anything about these two?
I think item number 21 is pretty straightforward, so I don't really have much to add on that one. But on number 20, this is one that Mr. Mills and myself and Mr. Crocker all kind of took a look at. This is a licensee that this board has recently disciplined, and it was for practicing on a revoked license. And then another complaint came in alleging, again, the same thing, practicing on a revoked license. It's a hard thing because we still have a large civil penalty outstanding for this that has not been paid, and the board has already imposed discipline on this licensee this year. And so in light of some of the factors I've cited in my summary, for example, this engagement has gone on with a long-term client for some time, and there is some apparently genuine dispute as to, when was the license revoked, when did this respondent notify the client, and when did they stop work or not? Did this client, in fact, if the respondent is to be believed, steal some of her working papers and give it to a future CPA without telling anyone? And just a litany of things that, in our combined opinion, might make this good to the extent there's any confusion about can you respond at yes or no practice, give them a cease and desist order, but also the local district attorney might could stand to be notified. We send them a copy of our documents and say, hey, look, if you think this merits criminal prosecution, there is some authority for that. It's not much, and to be candid, I don't know that it's ever happened in my tenure as board counsel, but at least if we make the referral and the criminal authorities don't do anything, then if we have to come back and go against this respondent again next year or in the future, then it'd be bordering on impossible to argue that there was any confusion to the extent there ever was before. So that's why the combination cease and desist letter with DA referral. But I'll take questions about that to the extent I can answer them.
What kind of time frame are we talking about from the day she was notified of our actions till she issued the report?
Well, that's one of the things, because if you look through some of the paperwork, there are various documents that seem to be dated in advance before the board's action for practicing on a revoked license. And then there are other documents that could arguably, if authenticated, and that's part of what we don't know 100% for sure, but it's a short time frame after that. It looked like there might have been some paperwork done after the practicing on a revoked license action from this board.
Well, what's the date of the report? And how much time frame is, I mean, that's the date that it was issued. That shouldn't be any question. And then you've got a date of when she was notified. I mean, were we talking about a week? Were we talking about 2 months?
I think it's probably closer to the 2 months than a week. But it's not any more than that. The majority of the work that was done that we have documentation for in the file predates the board's disciplinary action. So, and frankly, I've seen exactly one piece of paper that looks like it has a date after that. So that's whatever the board would like to do. Again, I'm happy to do that. It's just, that's what we came up with to start with, and kind of putting it out there for the committee and the full board as necessary to see if they agree.
Which one of the investigators, Don or Ray? Don, I mean, I realize that you're the technical and understand where I'm headed with that question, and obviously not trying to stir the pot with Chris over here.
Her opinion letter was dated within 30 days of the revocation. Now, when she issued the report, I don't know. I'm tied to her opinion, the date on her opinion letter. The fact that she was already under investigation and had been disciplined before running an expired license before it was revoked, we're still back to the same old thing of what we're going to do to her.
Here really is where we say, in the interest of judicial economy, it's, what we're really saying is her certificate's already revoked, and she can't get it back without reapplying. She's got a significant unpaid penalty, so.
Which by statute now, the board is without authority to give someone back a license who owes a civil penalty. It didn't used to be that way, but it is now. So if you're a former licensee and that, for example, the guy that the board hit up for that $110,000 civil penalty, I mean, he's in the wind, gone, and never coming back. But if he ever showed back up and wanted his license, unless he came with that amount of money and paid the penalty, this board could not give them a license back. So this licensee is similarly situated in that even if this person did everything else they're supposed to do to get reinstated, till that money's paid, they don't get a license back. So really the question becomes, you can't re-revoke a license, and there's already a large financial deterrent in place. So does the board wish to expend the time, effort, energy, and resources to add to that number and increase the burden and hurdle to jump over should this person ever wish to come back? I mean, that's one man's opinion and how I see it. Always welcome to hear differently, but
Okay, any other questions or comments on either of these cases?
One more question. What is her existing penalty? Do you know?
I think it's $5,000, and there may be costs with it. So if there is, it's not exactly that, but it would be more. But that's pretty close.
Revoked for 5 years currently?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions? I'll entertain a motion then to approve the recommendation of legal counsel here on both of these cases.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The Next group is recommended letters of warning, and those. And I have read those, and assume you've had a chance to read them, but Chris, you got anything to add? Comments here, or?
Not really. I would say that 3 of the 4 of these are from the P10 work that Mr. Mills and Mr. Butler have been doing, and these were just a little bit up the chain from the outright dismissals in the first section, but not so severe that they warranted disciplinary action, because the folks in question, once notified of these things, took care of it pretty quick and got done what they needed to get done. And frankly, that's really the point of not only the P10 exercises that 2 investigators are doing, but from a larger perspective, the board's goal is compliance and regulation in some order, but definitely making sure that folks who need to have licenses have them, those that aren't required to have them, we don't worry so much about, and then people that, have good faith misunderstandings and take the proper steps to get compliant, receive slightly more lenient treatment than those who don't fall in that category. So that's pretty much the deal on these.
A question, you say letter of warning, is that kind of a boilerplate letter, or is that letter tailored to each specific case, or?
Well, I do have some stock language that I use depending on the alleged violation. No need to recreate the wheel every single time, but it is tailored to not only the respondent in question, but also the statute and/or regulation that was alleged to have been violated. Typically, it'll say, the board met at this regularly scheduled meeting. They wish to hereby remind, admonish, warn, whatever the case may be, of this statute or regulation. Please be advised this is not reportable discipline. However, in the event of further problems, you may be subject to discipline. I mean, that's the basic summary. And the good news is that I would say the majority of folks who get letters of warning from us are, I wouldn't say happy to get them, because I'm sure they'd prefer a dismissal, but it beats a consent order, and more often than not, we don't see them again. And the folks who become frequent flyers, they get consent orders. So.
Okay, again, there are 4 cases here. I've read them. Hope you have any further comments or questions on these. Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to.
Mr. Stewart, I think Mr. Mills just whispered to me that he wanted to say something about number 22, because he investigated that one, so I apologize for that.
I'm sorry. I had originally issued this with a letter of warning, and I had correspondence with the respondent and stated that, we would probably do X, Y, Z. She had taken care of her Arizona CPA license. I said, however, the board has the right to impose disciplinary action on you because you failed to respond to the notice, which, in writing. And so day before yesterday, I received a phone call from the licensee who is in another state and retired, and she stated to me at that time, It all occurred during the time when we had Christy going and Josh coming and Pat retiring, and I have every evidence to believe that she probably did respond in writing, and it's probably still in the file somewhere. It was just never conveyed to me. So after speaking with her, I told her that I would at least recommend to the board that we change that to a dismissal, because she wants to retire her Tennessee license as well. So that was why I wanted to change my recommendation to Chris and see if he was interested in changing his recommendation to you.
I have no problem with that.
Okay. So that is item number 22.
Correct.
We're going to change the recommendation there from close upon the issuance of a letter of warning to simply a dismissal. All right. Now, are there any further comments or questions on any of these?
Make a motion that we approve items 22 through 26, noting that items 22 be changed from letter of warning to dismissal.
Can I
Is that
offer a
items
correction?
22 through 25 or
Yes.
26?
25.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I would accept that good correction, sir. Trying to
Okay, we've
slip one in on
got a
that.
motion then.
I second.
Got a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we got, three cases left. I think we probably should take those one at a time, talk about them, because they are a little more involved, a little more complicated. Do you want to lead that discussion, Chris, for us?
I'll be happy to. Item number 26, this particular respondent is located in far west Tennessee and appears that he does most of his business in Mississippi. However, there is and Mr. Mills, correct me if I'm wrong, or Mr. Butler, excuse me, but this respondent maintains, at least in name and by appearance, a branch office in Memphis, and has had a website offering to perform services to the public listing that Memphis location, but investigation revealing that not only has the respondent's firm permit been expired since 2004, there's been prior disciplinary action for that exact thing, which is what led to this respondent getting a firm permit in the first place. So on the one hand, the respondent's affidavit said, if I can decide to continue offer services in Tennessee, I'll get my permit. But considering that this is, it's a one-man firm, I think, this business's second go-around, a little higher civil penalty, and a requirement that, whatever you're going to do is whatever you're going to do, but it needs to be part of the consent order. You either close out that firm permit or renew it and get it back in good standing. So that's the reason for the $1,000 civil penalty, as the first one was $450 plus whatever it costs to get the firm permit. Item number 27, it is rather lengthy, but the facts are pretty straightforward and reasonably damning. The respondent, in this case, while technically being truthful on a license reinstatement application.
Hey, let me stop you here on this one, because the last part of this says that Casey Stewart and Henry Haas will recuse themselves from this. I don't know this case, and I don't know who it is. I don't remember. Recusing myself from this, but if I need to, I will gladly do that. But maybe somebody else ought to handle this meeting for that case, you think? If I'm recused, I need to probably not be involved in it at all.
As long as the record is clear that you are not participating in the consideration or voting, or Mr. Haas, I think that's fine. For this particular item, it's unusual, but the respondent actually requested those recusals, and based on her representation that she'd had some prior dealings or interactions with you guys, there are enough remaining board members to vote the way it probably needs to be voted here without that. So erring on the side of caution and not wanting to give any grounds for reversal later, which would be interesting considering that people who do consent orders waive their appeal rights, but whatever. So that's why. It's not something that the two of you could or should have known about in advance. I just went ahead and wrote up the report that way.
I guess my question is, in this meeting, should we maybe handle that one separate from the other two?
Well, if you would like, I can go to item number 28, and then if Mr. Royston is willing, he could lead the discussion on number 27.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we'll move to item number 28. This is a matter that was originally scheduled for formal hearing in July of this year and was continued by agreement of council. A respondent did retain counsel before the July meeting and had prior scheduling engagements, so we agreed to a continuance. And after some negotiations, we came to what obviously I believe is a reasonable agreement, but the board can do as it will. The allegation was that the respondent had his North Carolina license revoked for failure to comply with CPE audit, and but I spoke with the staff attorney for the North Carolina board, and they were $1,000 civil penalty and year revocation is their standard for first offenses in cases like that. So based on that, I looked at it and said, okay, well, there's two separate violations here, the revocation itself in North Carolina and the failure to report to Tennessee. This respondent lives out in California and works for a very prestigious CPA firm out there, and the board's original recommendation was a $1,000 civil penalty and a 2-year license revocation. However, after discussing that with the respondent's counsel, it was communicated to me that the respondent's employer had made clear that if suspension or revocation were part of this consent order, that he'd be terminated from his job. And, you know, again, just one man's opinion, but blowing a CPE audit and failure to report it doesn't seem like it should be a job-costing offense. So what I communicated to the respondent's counsel is, you know, if we're going to do something different, then you got to give to get. So we changed it to 2 years of probation and increased the civil penalty from $1,000 to a total of $1,700, which would be $1,500 civil penalty and $200 to reimburse us for the board's cost incurred in filing the matter. And so where we'd come down if the board approves is a $1,700 civil penalty and 2-year license probation. If that is approved or something like it, then the formal hearing scheduled for tomorrow will not proceed. Well, it's not going to proceed anyway, because if the board doesn't approve it, it's going to have to be continued because the respondent's not going to be here from California tomorrow. So if the board just says outright, no, we don't want to settle this on these terms or at all, then it'll go forward in January. But my recommendation would be to settle it on these terms and put that particular complaint behind us. So that's my discussion on number 28, and I'll take feedback and comments if there are any.
The cases that are enumerated by numbers 26 and 28, are there any questions of Chris or any comments on any of these? I think Mr. Whitaker's done a very good job of explaining the facts and circumstances and reasoning that was used. Hearing no questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Move that we accept the recommendations for number 26 and 28.
I have a second to that? Second. Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I'm going to turn the committee meeting over to Mr. Royston to handle number 27, and I'm going to recuse myself. Tomorrow, Henry, you'll have to do the same thing if you're willing. I know, but tomorrow you'll need to recuse yourself. Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Whitaker, number 27, please.
All right. This particular respondent lives in Georgia and had a Tennessee license that expired in 2005. In approximately that time frame, this respondent was convicted of embezzlement for allegedly stealing about $292,000 from her employer and was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. This respondent came back and applied for the reinstatement of her Tennessee license in 2012, and thanks to an inartfully worded question on the form which says, have you been convicted of a felony in the last 5 years? Well, she truthfully answered no, because it was 2012 by that point. However, that does not relieve this licensee of her duty to notify the board of felony convictions in writing, and she did not do so. to say nothing of the underlying discreditable act and other violations that come with embezzling $292,000. There's some verbiage in there that I included at the respondent's request, but at the end of the day, I would not recommend anything to the board other than voluntary revocation for the maximum 5-year period, given the seriousness of the request. The only thing that I would say is to not impose a civil penalty simply because I don't think, and it doesn't appear that this respondent could pay it, even if assessed. So if she is willing to sign a voluntary revocation consent order for the maximum 5 years, and with a condition that if she ever wants to come back and get a license, there won't be fill out a form and hope it slips through the process. She will have to come back here and appear in person before the future board in place at that time. So that's the summary and the recommendation. As I mentioned, if she wants to sign a consent order for a 5-year revocation, we can do that. If not, formal hearing.
Is that a rule requirement? Can I ask a question? Oh, can I ask a question, Mr.
Sure.
Is that a rule requirement that you have to notify the board of a felony conviction? You don't have to tell it. You don't have to tell me the number. Okay.
Yes, if you're convicted of a felony, you must notify the board in 30 days. If you have your right to practice limited, suspended, or canceled, or anything of the sort, same thing.
So was the license active when she was convicted, or had it expired, or?
It was active.
Thank you, Mr. Mills.
It was active, yes.
So it expired and was not renewed because she was in jail and unable to renew it.
She went to prison in August, and her license expired that December.
And then it's not clear to me, I'm sorry. So we reinstated her in 2012. This came to our attention recently, and now we're going to do a 5-year suspension. Is that right?
Yes.
Currently practicing as a CPA?
I don't believe so. Mr. Mills?
Has an active license at this point in time because it was reinstated.
You don't know what her current, I think in here it stated something that is she currently employed, and is she employed as a?
Is currently employed in an unlicensed firm.
Yes, truth is stranger than fiction.
Do we have any other questions of either Mr. Mills or Mr. Whitaker regarding this particular case? I would entertain a motion then for the disposition of item number 27.
Move that we accept the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. I was getting worried. Do I have a second?
A second.
Got a second. Take a vote. With Mr. Stewart abstaining, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, like sign. We'll make the recommendation to the full board then. Thank you. Well, I would like to thank Mr. Whitaker while I still have, or robbed it back the microphone, on the changes you've made in compiling these, and it's a working process, but it's we're getting all the pieces and no surprises. So thank you.
I'll share that thanks with Mr. Bloffice as well for his assistance and recommendations.
I was going to suggest if Mr. Ballfus had the idea, is there any way I could take credit for it? But,
You'll have to ask him about that.
yeah. Actually, I think Don probably helped with that, stimulate the idea by his grouping of these things in prior board meetings. But Mr. Ballfus, thank you. That was very helpful. So, any other business come before the committee? Chris, anything else you need to say? Mark?
No, sir.
All right, we'll stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Which one of these icons?
Executive Committee will come to order. First item is to review the fiscal 14 results and the year-to-date results for 15. Mark, do you want to? Everybody has a schedule that has multiple years on it, so it's going to serve a variety of purposes. So.
On your iPads, under operating results, I believe it's under operating results FY16 budget. Everything is right there. If you'll look at the FY14 actual numbers, you'll see that our revenues are up a little bit this year from in FY14 from FY13. We had $1,160,330 come through. The state has not finished compiling all of its final numbers yet, so we don't have a regulatory fee yet or our cost backs. Mr.
Do
Ross.
we have more people paying dues? Is that the reason that's up? More licensees?
We have more people renewing. We have more people applying. So yes.
And didn't we lower it?
That didn't go into effect. That'll go into effect this year for renewals, Henry.
14 and 15?
Yes, it'll go into effect for those renewing this year at 12/31/14. So this is as a result of at the end of June 30th, 14.
Okay.
That also includes civil penalties collected, which obviously were not budgeted.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
We don't really know what the chargebacks are going to be yet.
No, I had talked to Bill Huddleston in the Assistant Commissioner's office last week, and he told me he'd have them to me as soon as he could, but I haven't gotten anything yet, so we don't have those.
That the core designation that you have referred to in the first column, or what is estimated cost of core, what is that?
The estimated cost of the core project is the database implementation that they're doing, and the $70,000 is our share of that the Assistant Commissioner said would come out of our reserve balance. If you look down there to year-end
He didn't give us the opportunity to vote on either.
No, sir, that was an across the board. Everybody's going to pay for it, and it's going to happen. Down there under year-end cost backs, toward the very bottom, I have a budget amount of $212,000. That should be close, but I really can't tell you what they're going to be.
Questions regarding 14 results? You want to talk about August 15th before we get to 16?
Sure. If you will look in over farther to your right, year-to-date August, FY15, as of the close of business on August 31st, we had revenues of $15,938. That is down from August of 14. We have not been pursuing our delinquencies as actively as we did last year. We've not had the staffing to do that. We will begin picking that up. As a matter of fact, I think, Karen, we've sent out emails and made notifications just last month. So hopefully we'll see some results from that. But that's why revenues are down from August 14 to August of 15. Salaries are pretty standard. Travel is up a little bit, but that's because of the traveling that I'm doing as chair of the Executive Directors Committee. And other than that, gentlemen, our 15 budget was $224,000 in year-end cost backs, and that's included. But August looks like it's right on track with last year, pretty much.
I really think that the cost backs, that's for the whole year, not for 2 months.
That is for 2 months.
And
that is for
we
the whole
really
year.
should just leave that out. But our total expenditures are really $106,000 rather than $330,000.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Questions of Mark regarding 14 operating results? not, you can go ahead. As I understand it, Mark, you've told us that you're under instructions from CNI to prepare the fiscal 16 budget.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
So that's, that middle column there is comparing it against the fiscal 15 budget that we're operating under. And, well, I'll let you go ahead and make any observations or comments that you have.
If you will note there, the revenues are down, the 1,102,210. Henry, that's where we're going to hit the lower renewal fees. That's going to come out right there. We included a 3% increase in salaries. We know there's not going to be an increase for FY15, but the governor has not yet announced his budget for FY16. There's a possibility that there may be some salary increases. We've not had increases for 3 years. I think 1 year we had a 1% increase. So we've not had any significant salary increases for several years. So I'm thinking the governor may actually put something in the budget for FY16.
Governor's also asked for all departments to reduce their budgets by 7%.
7%, yeah.
That did not apply to the regulatory boards.
I think it applies to commerce and insurance.
Yeah, for them, but not the boards underneath.
Oh, no.
So, but in conversation, I've understood that it would be appropriate not to anticipate at this current time any compensation adjustments in 16. So we have 3% in here, which is without precedent. Has there ever been a 3% increase?
Yes, before the moratorium went into effect, there were years when we had 2.5%, 3.5%.
I defer to you gentlemen whether you think it's appropriate to leave 3% in there or 0 or something in between. If you go to the attachment A, Mark has included information regarding the salaries of each of the 8 people in State Board of Accountancy and how he gets to the benefit or the total salaries and benefit computation.
They're telling us not to put the 3% on in, or are they not telling us anything?
As I understand it, in speaking to the assistant commissioner, he said no employee of the regulatory boards should be counting on a salary adjustment in 16. It's going to end. But he said if the budget was turned in with no compensation increase, that would be acceptable or appropriate.
But they don't have a problem with us trying to budget for it to look at what it would look like. Whether it's awarded or not is another story.
Right.
Okay.
I think under the environment that the state's operating under and the overall mandate of 7% decrease and no salary adjustment being anticipated for other state employees, I think it's sort of aggressive on our part to put in 3%. How did you come up with 3% rather than 5%?
It's a guess, Bill. Yeah, I mean, that's it, just a guess.
Chris?
I was just going to say, I can't speak for other board staff folks, but I'm under reg boards as well, and 1 to 2% has been more the speed of increases when there have been salary increases. That's what we've seen. I've been here since '09. In terms of the adjustments, I haven't seen 3%, but 1 to 2 one year was 2 point something. So if you're looking for something less than 3, maybe in that range, but it's certainly up to the committee and the board, and I don't.
Well, our challenge is that we're talking about a budget way off into the future.
Right.
We're keeping it at 3% or doing 2%?
We really have no control over what is awarded by the state anyway, do we?
Well, interestingly enough, I think if you read the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy rules, the board is responsible for the compensation of the executive director. Right. But I think that's as far as it goes, right?
Yes.
And the investigators.
And the investigators.
Okay. But not the staff.
Not the staff.
So if I recall, in years past, the board had voted to have a compensation increase to the executive director, to Mark, of a significant amount, or an increase, and it was never approved by the commissioner, assistant commissioner, or who powers it be, even though we have the technical or legal authority to make that adjustment. Is that?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Salary increase, not
No,
good.
it did not happen, even though the board approved it.
I guess I don't really understand, what's the significance of putting a 3% increase in here if the state, are you just assuming that maybe in 2016 that there would be a 3% increase?
Yes.
But the truth of the matter is, you're going to get whatever the state gets that year, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
You're going to get an increase based on whatever the state gets.
Yes, but if we don't budget, if they do give us something and we don't budget for it, then we're going to be out of whack that much.
Yes, but a budget, all we know about the budget is that it's wrong. It's either going to be too conservative or too liberal. I mean.
Would we go back and adjust the budget based on what they actually get? Or would we just leave it alone?
No, we could adjust it, but I doubt that we would, particularly, we usually run significant surpluses.
Right.
So I doubt that it would erode the surplus to such an extent that it would cause a problem. And even if we had a deficit, our reserves, we have over $750,000 worth of reserves. So our track record is that the budgets have been exceedingly conservative, and the actual results typically have come in with surpluses. In recent years, the surpluses haven't been as great as in years past. But for example, right now, we're anticipated to have a surplus this year if cost backs stay the same. We'll have $187,000 net surplus, or out in the commercial world, it'd be called net profit.
That's your regulatory fee that I haven't taken out.
Unless the regulatory fees subject to it being adjusted, yeah. And if they were 223 last year, likelihood is going to be more than 212 this year, but who knows?
guess the issue that we're trying to resolve is the 3%, right?
This, yeah.
Just 3%. If we want to go with the 3% or something lower.
Yes. I'd recommend we go with something lower. The other question I have, Mark, regarding the 3%, on the schedule you gave, it's 3% for each person. Is that regardless of performance?
The way the Department of Commerce and Insurance works is that if you are, as long as you meet your goals and your evaluation is what they call a 3, then you're going to get the raise. You have to have an underperforming evaluation before you will not get the raise.
Somebody that did an exceptional job doesn't get more than the specified amount.
No.
I'd recommend that we go with 1 or 2%.
Suggest 2%.
Second that portion.
Okay, that's fine. Let's go with 2%. And Mark, I wouldn't, we don't need to change it. We'll just communicate to the board tomorrow that rather than 3%, this will, when it's turned in, it will be 2%. The other question, by the way Mark has put this together with the comparing 15 against 16 budgets, the 16 budget, from my observations, is remarkably the same as the current fiscal year, except for employee training. And it's got a, even though this past year we only had $5,300, in 2016 we have it budgeted at $20,000, but you had an explanation of for some of it.
Yes, sir. In the past, we have budgeted NASBA attendance under travel. And when I say NASBA attendance, there is a fee to attend NASBA events. It's currently around $695 per person when you go to these meetings. We had previously put that under travel. It is now being assessed to us as employee training. So when you take into consideration $695 for the meetings that we attend, including the board members, that adds up to a significant amount of money. So we dropped another $10,000 into the employee training to cover that. And no,
Which is probably on the conservative side.
well, consider there are 4 of us going to the NASBA annual meeting. That is $2,800 right there.
That's
for employee training.
That's for in fiscal 15, not 16.
Yes, but I mean, that will be assessed in the next year as well. I'm assuming that we're going to continue NASBA participation.
But under travel, it's 15 has gone from 64,000 to 48,000, and that's recognizing that your tour of duty as the chair of the executive directors expires in a couple months.
It expires in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Theoretically, we have shifted the 10,000 out of that category to employee training.
Yeah. Well, no, it would have been under.
Travel.
Are you saying
Travel.
What was under travel? Is that what he said?
Travel.
Okay.
Yeah. Mark, if you don't spend the money on employee training, sending people to NASBA meetings, would you use that for training of other staff people for other reasons?
You do have professional staff here who have to have CPE, and sometimes we do have to pay for it, yes. And that would be included in the employee training.
I've also pointed out to Mark that at least I've been able to get CPE without paying for it. Kinds of options. And, you know, one of the things that, regardless of whether you pay for it or not, I would encourage you can easily get invited to the training opportunities for any of the big four, or, I mean, probably the big 10 firms online, and they're usually very well done. So, other than the adjustment from 3 to 2% on compensation, do we have any other changes? I assume you've gotten a chance to read the narrative that went with this. Okay.
Why would employee benefits stay the same?
Your employee benefits are based on your amount of salaries. The department calculates them at 37% of salaries plus longevity.
Looking for a
If you're-
a
whenever-
motion for
To approve this.
approve the budget and the operating results, with the exception of going from 3 to 2%.
Yeah, just looking for a motion on the 16 budget.
I'd make
adjusted.
a motion that we approve the 16 budget as presented with the correction of going from 3% to 2% and any related adjustments that it might have on the.
I agree. Second.
Motion passes. Travel information, there is a supplemental schedule, and this is what you've put together for fiscal 16, is that right?
Yes, if you're looking at the travel plan, Bill, that would be, are you looking at the travel plan, or do you want to look at the travel incurred by the ED and the investigators for the first quarter?
Well, just an observation regarding the attachment B is just support for what's in the budget we just approved.
Yes, sir.
And it's an approximation of what you think by month, based upon when you knew that NASWA meetings were going to take place and the like. That's fine, but then let's go to the travel for the fourth quarter.
On your iPads, you have travel quarter 1, 2014, 2015. And you have that broken out by professional.
Hold on a second. What's it called?
Travel.
Well, I'll be
Q1.
darned, this is in alphabetical order.
Is it travel Q1, 14 and 15?
Yes.
Is that what we're looking at?
Yes. And what you have there is what was charged to us from July 1 through September 30th of 2014 for myself, for Mr. Mills, and for Mr. Butler, based on our expenses in Edison.
Tell me what the Prometric quarterly review is.
The quarterly business review is where the AICPA, Prometric, and NASBA get together to discuss the exam, the events that are coming up, any problems they've had with the exam, that type of thing.
Every executive director attend that?
No, that is part of my job as
Okay.
chair of the ED committee.
Okay. What is SSE?
State-specific ethics.
Okay. Lord, we've talked about that a little bit.
At NASBA AICPA Summit, will you, is that because of your position with NASBA?
Will not see that one again.
Mark, I think it would be very helpful that in the future that when you provide this information to the board, in your case, that you indicate the number of days that each one of these events took you away from the office.
That
Are there any NASBA, the special work that you did this past year is and the exception, but are there NASBA, TSCPA, AICPA, are there any meetings that you don't attend?
in regard to, I attend all the ones that I am required to attend. If I'm on a committee, then yes, I should be there.
But going forward, is there a requirement that you attend every meeting?
Yes, as chair of the ED committee, I was required to be in attendance. But going forward, for example, the AICPA State Board Committee, yes, there's an unspoken requirement that I should be there. But that
All
only
the
meets 4 times a
executive
year.
directors normally attend that.
The other executive directors on the committee, yes, attend that.
So you would be doing that as long as you're on that committee. So how long a term is that committee?
The State Board Committee is another year.
Did the TSCPA board have a meeting in Atlanta?
Yes.
It was Barnsley Gardens.
I think you went to it.
Oh, yeah, well, not in Atlanta. I didn't go to Atlanta.
It was north of Atlanta.
Is Barnsley Gardens?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay, all right. I didn't go.
Well, there's only one. Georgia only has one zip code, so.
Okay.
And one family tree.
Any other questions regarding this travel report? Don, when you say board business, what does that mean?
I usually classify anything when I come to this office, when I'm turning in reports, when I am attending, for instance, complaint meetings that we have every month. Anytime I'm in Nashville, I usually lump it under board business.
Ray, do you classify it differently, or? Okay, so that's one and the same, okay.
Try to get on the same page.
Do you, both of you have state cars. Now, does that mean, do you have a state gas credit card?
Yes.
So this travel is for hotel expenses?
It includes mileage. When we set these up, we have mileage rate, it's standard mileage rate. So, for instance, if you look at mine, I went to Unum Provident. Well, that's in Chattanooga. So obviously, I had no hotel. That's my mileage, $17.39.
But if you have a state car in the state, you're charging gas on a state credit card, why do you get mileage?
I don't get it. I'm just reporting it.
You're
We don't get reimbursed for this. Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying this is what is charged to the state board for the use of the mileage cost, which is really the gas?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do we get charged, do we have a monthly charge for the use of the state cars, or how is that part of the chargeback?
That is part of the, what do they call it? The state professional services.
So How many days a month, Donna and Ray, are you guys out on the road, or just on the average?
Three a week, but, not as much overnight because, we're divvied up. So for instance, I went the entire month of August without an overnight stay.
Yeah, and a lot of mine's around here. Back home every day.
And you're not out on the road, do you work from home? Next item, Wendy, you've been very patient. You've been peer review transparency.
All right, this is just kind of an update to this committee on kind of where we stand, what's happened since the last board meeting with regard to peer review transparency, or confidentiality, as I tend to call it more often.
Which one are we looking at now on our agenda?
Henry, if I can pull my library up, I think it's the very last one. What does it say, Chris? TSCPA.
Oh,
yeah, right.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Which
so
one are you going to start with?
I'm going to start with the transparency or confidentiality of peer review. So, just as a report, Mark and Henry, you attended the TSCPA Board of Directors meeting in August, and I understand gave a presentation regarding several regulatory issues. One topic was peer review transparency, or a discussion of the current confidentiality guidelines that are in place with regards to peer review. After that, our board broke out into small groups and had discussions surrounding this topic. And at the end of that retreat, the board voted to continue to support the confidentiality provisions as they are currently in place, and to support the formation or implementation of the PROC that we've discussed in the past to oversight the peer review program administered by the TSCPA. Now, since that time, the TSCPA Peer Review Committee had their annual meeting, met in person, and discussed several topics relevant to audit quality and peer review. And this topic came up with that group as well. A lot of discussion happened, and they felt like it should be a topic of a conversation that warranted further discussion. So we are having one of our peer review committee members, who's a member of the AICPA Peer Review Board, will be addressing this topic again with our board of directors at the beginning of November, November 6th, I believe. And then on November 7th, that Friday, our council meets, and we are going to have a panel discussion that will include folks such as Bill Blofus and Mark, myself, and some peer review folks from the area, in hopes to get some open conversation and dialogue about the matter, pros, cons, current things going on in the profession that might lead to one direction or the other. So basically, that was just the update I wanted to give you all, and I know it was discussed briefly at the last board meeting, the idea of peer review transparency and confidentiality. Questions on that?
Mark, are you planning on attending those meetings?
I've been invited to the council meeting, Henry, not to the board meeting.
Correct.
Or I didn't. You talked about meetings on the 6th and 7th.
Right. So the TSCPA Board of Directors, which is the smaller group, will meet on the 6th. Okay. And then on the 7th, the larger group, council will meet. That's where we're going to have the panel and open discussion regarding these topics, and we'll be able to share with the council any discussion that the board had the day before.
That's on a Thursday and Friday, so the council's meeting on a Friday?
Yes.
They normally meet on a Saturday.
They used to meet on a Saturday. I think it's 2 years ago they started meeting on a Friday.
And so you've been invited to council?
And Bill as well.
But what you're saying is that, while at this meeting, in the last meeting of the TSCPA board, they voted to retain confidentiality, but it's now open back for discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what, any further, what's the status of the PROC, or the Tennessee Society's position on whether we need to have a PROC, which I guess we're required to by rules?
Statute, yeah.
You know, we are fully supportive of the PROC if that's a manner that would make the board feel better with confidentiality in place. I plan tomorrow to outline some of those specifics regarding oversight that we already perform and available reports to you all. And maybe at the end of that conversation, the board can decide whether to move forward with implementation of a PROC or potentially use some of these items as oversight of the process.
I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with the disciplinary reason for opening this up. I would be very concerned about the disciplinary aspect of this. Now, opening it up for firm mobility is a totally different issue, and that seems to be more important. But I think there's a lot of CPAs who would be very concerned about the board being able to take what they learn and use it for disciplinary action. I'm not so sure that's ever been something that peer review was ever set up for. And so I would be very hesitant to allow whatever the board learns through this process to be to come back and be able to use it for disciplinary action.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with regards to most of the concern on the TSCPA board. I mean, I think that's where most people are lying, but there's still obviously different sides of, or different opinions, and I think, but I think more people are on your side as far as some concern about what would happen to those. You know, if it's opened up, what happens to those firms? What would you do with that information? How does it affect those firms? Does it affect them after they messed up once? Does it affect them after they mess up twice? What's happening in other states with regards to peer review where states do have access to that information? You know, I'm aware of some states that have access but do absolutely nothing with it. But then there are states that do monitor it very closely. So it's a matter of what this board would like to do with that information if it was made available to them.
I would just say that we ought to approach this thing very cautiously and on an educational basis. In other words, as time goes on, we being the board, may learn a lot more about what's taking place in this area and find that what's taking place is very sufficient for what needs to be done. Or we may learn otherwise and decide that maybe a disciplinary action would be warranted. So I think it's an educational process, and to say that we're going to jump in there and provide disciplinary action immediately, I just couldn't support that.
Well, but having transparency wouldn't require this board or the State Board of Accountancy to take disciplinary action.
I think that's what I think that's what everybody's hoping.
Well, let me
We'd
explain.
want.
If we were to change the laws that we currently have in place with regards to confidentiality, and allow that information to be made available. It would not be publicly made available. It would be made available just to the state board for their use. So Sally Jones couldn't go somewhere and see anyone's peer review report and make decisions if we changed the
So
law.
what would, if the state board had that information, what would we do with it?
I think that's the question, and some states do receive the information and do nothing with it.
If I can jump in here, talking about this, if we receive the information in the state board office, then it is public record and anyone can see it.
Unless there is a specific statutory carve-out or something specifically designating that as confidential and not subject to public review, the presumption is, and I think I've said this before, any document created by a state agency in the course of its business that is not specifically covered by statute, regulation, or privilege is presumed open. And so...
Good point. What is I guess the question I have, well, how does this impact mobility?
So
by our confidentiality current rules?
I'm going to let Mark speak to that because I believe he's the one that has some concern.
There are some states who have some concern that we cannot properly, and please don't be offended. There are some states that believe that we cannot properly monitor our firms if we are not allowed access to their peer reviews. So they believe that you could have some firms doing some bad work in Tennessee. We don't know about it, and we can't do anything about it because we can't see the peer reviews. And they don't want those firms coming into their state providing services.
Right. So
that's the concern.
Down the road, you know, if Oklahoma or Texas or somebody has open and we don't, a Tennessee firm couldn't practice there. Or they, is that what you're saying?
That is the way the states are operating now. They do not have firm mobility.
Well, it's a very interesting topic because I come from a background and environment where, not that anybody was excited about it at all, but the PCAOB, you can read about it in the Wall Street Journal of their reviews of the firms that have public clients. And, you know, you either, if you have a public company as an audit client, you're subject to a PCAOB review. And part of it is confidential and part of it is not. And the confidential part stays confidential as long as the firm takes corrective action in a specified period of time, and it becomes public when the PCAOB hasn't been satisfied with the follow-up. The other thing is, from a client standpoint, over the years, and I currently serve on a number of audit committees, and I will not have a company engage a firm that will not share their peer review. So, engaged. And much to my surprise, in one case, it was a very critical peer review.
When you say share peer review, you're talking about the results of the peer review? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if I was a company, I would want to know my audit firm was doing a good job. So, but that's a client's prerogative and their board. So
Sometimes I think that's an educational issue as well, meaning, you know, it's hard to reach every company out there that's looking for an audit to make sure that they're looking at these types of things, because definitely that's the way to make sure people are doing good work, is if that's part of engaging that CPA firm, is that they have to turn over their peer review report. It's similar to working with the comptroller's office here in Tennessee. If you want to engage to do an audit for them, then you have to submit your peer review report.
And in the case that I had the experience with, it was interesting and very positive that they brought the critical comments to the attention of the audit committee as they were required to do, and the corrective action that they were taking. And we continued to use that firm. So it doesn't necessarily mean that your firm gets dismissed. So,
I think the other topic that's similar is mobility, and just to bring to the attention of this group some of the comments we've received recently. So it's my understanding there's about 14 states that do have firm mobility similar to the state of Tennessee. But the other states that do not, well, all states have received a list of firms from the Department of Labor. Am I saying this right, Mark? The states have received a list of firms from the Department of Labor that have performed employee benefit plan audits for entities in their state. So some states have been very aggressive with this list and reviewed the list to make sure everyone's licensed appropriately in their state. Well, when they're not, they have sent letters to those firms notifying them of the non-compliance issue and asking them to handle it. So there are we've had several firms in the state of Tennessee, we understand, that have received such letters. From Texas, from Arizona, are the two that I can think of in the examples, indicating that they weren't properly licensed in their state. In one case, it's my understanding that the audit work was done in Kentucky, and they did properly register in Kentucky, but that company was owned by somebody in Texas. So they did not license their firm in Texas. However, Texas is the one that sent the letter saying you're not properly licensed here. You did an audit for an entity here. So there's some confusion. These are firms, to my knowledge, that do good work, that are not trying to do the wrong thing. I think sometimes it's just not exactly clear everywhere they need to be licensed. And just wanted you to be aware of some of these concerns. And if you have a chance in any meetings that you attend to encourage other states to adopt mobility, because it has worked here. It's worked in Ohio for over a decade. And really try to be supportive of that, because I think in the end it's simply going to help the firms in this state be able to operate more efficiently across the country. Also, Mark, I pulled something from a presentation on firm mobility that the AICPA had done, and one of the concerns is public protection. And this statement says, to be eligible for mobility, the firm must comply with peer review and CPA ownership requirements of the mobility state. If not in compliance, then they must seek to register as an out-of-state firm. All firms should know and understand that they can make their peer review results available to any state they choose to operate in. They just have to ask me in writing. And that comes whenever they schedule a peer review, or at any intermittent time, they may send me an email that says, please make my peer review results available to the state of Texas, to the state of Arizona, to all states that have access to this. And I simply go into our system and make that change and file that request in their file.
Are those results that you make available any different than what the firm
No. So what we make
would have to make available to them?
No different. So we are just trying to assist the firms, really, is what we're trying to do. We house those documents, and it's easy for us to simply add it to the database that they can log into and view. But it would be the same as you just doing it yourself. So it's the report, the acceptance letter, and the completion letter, if there is one.
Those would be a credibility issue there, but,
it could be done either way.
We heard at the, when Mark and I attended the NASMA meeting back in June, we heard a couple of issues about, for example, Florida's peer review down there is a little bit different than Tennessee's peer review. They don't require peer review for compilations and reviews. They only require peer reviews for audits.
And they just started that. That's brand new.
Yeah, and one of the Florida people described how it happened, and it had to do with a legislator had a sister that didn't want to have peer reviews for compilations and reviews. And so she was able to get the legislator to get it passed in Florida, change the Florida law where it didn't include compilations and reviews. And I was pretty shocked and astounded when I heard that. But the point was that different states have different views on what should be peer reviewed and what should not be peer reviewed.
Up until now, Florida, I came from Florida and used to administer the program, the peer review program there. And up until just within, it may not even be effective yet, or at least within the past year, the only requirement for peer review in the state of Florida was if you were an AICPA member.
So if you weren't a member, you didn't have to be peer reviewed?
Correct.
Wow.
Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Item here, communications with the board. Over the years, one of the things that I found challenging, since the board only meets on a quarterly basis, we go for extended periods of time of really not being aware of what's going on with Mark and crew. And he and I met and brainstormed about various information that could be helpful to the board on an interim basis. And I discovered that Mark prepares a monthly report that goes to the assistant commissioner. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And I think you've gotten 2 copies of it, and I found it to be very informative and helpful. And so Mark will hope you'll continue that practice of sending it to the board. And he talked about other information that might be included in it. Do you have any observations about that, Mark?
No, I think the other observations that we talked about were the number of applications that we were receiving and processing, and some detail there a little bit. So no, I'll be more than happy to send this to the board, to the full board, if this is something that you all would find useful.
They can elect to ignore it.
Yep.
So
You said 2 months?
I think you just
September is the only one I've seen.
Yeah, September's the only one they've seen.
I
They didn't see August.
Okay.
And you'll start doing that every month, sending them to us?
Yes, they're due to the Assistant Commissioner's Office 10 days after the first of the month, so you'll get it by the 10th of the month for the previous month.
But you'll send it to us the same time you send it to the commissioner's office?
I just think it would be very helpful. And the other thing, I would suggest, in observing the committee meetings today, enforcement or probable cause has always come to the committee meetings with basically their recommendations of actions to take on each one of those cases, which is helpful. And I just think when issues that from licensing and law and rules, it would be helpful to, I think, the committee if you came, this is the issue here, and this is what our observations are, our management's recommendation. And I just think it could help, your input and recommendations could help the committee deliberate more efficiently. I'm not suggesting, pages of recommendations unless it's warranted, but like the policies thing, if if your recommendation was for the committee to edit and revise it and update it, that would have been your recommendation. I think it ended up being your recommendation. It wasn't.
Yeah, they sent it back to me, so.
Yeah, it didn't get accepted.
Tried.
Do we have any other matters for the executive committee to consider? Mark, do you have anything that we have missed?
No, sir.
I just try not to screw this up.
You doing time, Bill?
That's for the record, I guess. Thank you very much. We're just adjourned.
Thank you.
Right.